action statement.
Yeah, I feel a little bit weird today having the necklace instead of the star.
Scott?
We turned ours down.
That's not everything. It's not. Yeah, it's not. So Jill, I have to tell you. Oh, yes.
Sixth grade. Oh, I know. Is this the non-dual language class or dual language class? That's a big group. I saw those moms.
But it was very different.
Yeah, I mean, because sixth graders are not accustomed to being read to in the same way.
Yeah.
And they don't usually get the conclusion of a story in the same way. They're reading is usually they're doing some chapters and it's an ongoing saga of something.
So it was
They
pretty.
were not excited or were they?
So, yes, and then let's get to what I did.
That group actually has traveled together as a class for over 6 years now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's only one non-dual language education class. It's a little bit of an anomaly in the district, actually.
Yeah, because I just had these pictures like that. And some of them aren't even interested, they're like, sitting back, they're like, they're doing stuff. And this texture.
Wow, because the 5-year-olds were like, how many stories do you get to read? And like, I got 3 in. You got 3 in. Yeah, we got 3 stories in.
Yeah, and it's everything, and
That's like, it was one of
it's
not exciting.
So I thought it was pretty funny. I wanted to share that with you.
So that is like, I was like, I had the best class ever.
Yeah, I know she was. They were like, great.
Oh, they built their expectations.
I'm sorry, but they, I mean,
They were, but you know, it's just different.
and you weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
They were engaged school students with individual
They
issues. They were walking.
How are you?
Yes, the older students were walking around.
Excited for our board meeting?
Yes, and they were, so the older students were, doing reading, had signed in, let's find your name, let's take you to your class.
Yeah, and so I just had to giggle.
As soon as I walked in, I was gonna touch it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, so that was, they were good, and then the book that the students gave me, the language that they had already been read to, so they had to pick it up. And they were the, they already heard that story. I was like, oh, I know, so it was good, we had good conversation, but it was just really kind of funny though. That's cute.
That's okay.
Good, how are you?
I've done kindergarten.
Hi, Karen, how are you? Good.
October 20th, 1992.
Oh my gosh.
What is that from?
I have no idea.
Some old
Interesting.
book somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, what's that little grandbaby? How's he doing?
He's doing okay. You know,
Couple setbacks.
yeah, we now wonder if that's a thyroid problem. Thank you. He's going to an endocrinologist now. Thank you.
Oh, that's really young.
Yeah. Is it because of famous issues, or is he just kind of working through it?
Well, they're concerned about his famous link.
He's too short.
Yeah, well, not following the profile.
Oh, gosh. I hate when they do that because, we know kids grow differently.
No. Yeah, this one was this large for it. I'm not sure she's that's thyroid.
Well, it's because he was born preemie, so it might not just be closing soon.
Yeah.
At the same pace, because when would he have been due?
October 7th. She's 3 months still kind of delayed. Okay. So they're just. Just keep them in our prayers. Thank you. And the parents, because it's usually, it's harder on the parents than it is on the kids a lot of the time. Yeah. And it just put them after they start feeling like a regular vaccine, and then they realize we can take care of our own emotions. Right. So that's huge. Yeah. It's huge.
We'll start in a few minutes.
Missing somebody across.
Yeah, that's 1 minute.
Yeah. Which I guess isn't a bad thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I was like, that would be fun. Yeah, and then how about the way?
How are you, Scott? How are your holidays?
I know, I liked it. I was in the showers, but I was like, now. Yeah, it's gonna be the best year ever, which is the only year we're going to get, so you might as well. Yeah.
All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Pardon us for the delay. I am calling this work session meeting to order. And Dr. Watts, I'd like to ask you to begin the work session, please.
Yes, thank you, President Vengadasala, members of the board. Ms. Halley, community and friends, Happy New Year, and I would like to take this personal point of privilege to ask two members of Team KSD to join us for our first of two presentations for this work session. First, Mariah Martin, Chief Human Resources Officer, if you would come to the podium and begin your report, followed by Ms. Martin will be Melissa Larmy for the board communication plan review. Ms. Martin, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, team, come on up. All right. Good evening, President Vengadasala, members of the board, Dr. Watts and Ms. Halley. On October 24, 2018, at the Board of Directors meeting, HR presented the Workforce Retention Study Plan to be implemented in the 2018-2019 school year. And this plan, if you'll recall, included 3 parts, and one was the school climate survey expected to be implemented this spring with the organizational effectiveness community. Second, the ongoing exit surveys and interviews provided to all employees upon separation. And finally, the stay interviews, which have 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. As promised at that presentation, tonight we are providing a report on the stay interviews phase 1. This is a mid-course report, which we implemented November and December 2018. The Plan, Do, Study, Act continuous improvement cycle is reflected in this work. As part of the study in PDSA, this mid-progress report will identify the patterns and trends that are beginning to emerge from the data gathered in phase 1. This data helps us to prepare for phase 2 of the stay interviews, which are scheduled to begin this coming month. Tonight, I'm joined by the team that led this work for KSD. As CHRO, or Chief Human Resources Officer, I did not read or review any of the data that was collected from the study interviews, and it was done entirely by this team behind me. And they are going to be the ones that are going to present tonight, so I'll let you know who you're going to be hearing from. Bree Kemp is our Assistant Director for Employment Support. Stephanie Murphy is our Executive Assistant in Human Resources. Jacqueline Henley, a former music teacher, right? Making sure I got that right, and current educational assistant for Horizon Elementary School. She's also a member of the KSD Strategic Planning Steering Committee and is an administrative intern, so she's got a few things going on. And then Tracy Dora, a teacher and ESSA instructional coach, also a former administrative intern. Really excited to have this team leading this work. And just so you know who's in front of you, it represents certificated and classified employees, non-represented and represented employees. So excited about the diversity we have on the team. Tonight, they will walk you through how they gathered the data in phase one, how they reviewed and analyzed the data, patterns and trends from the data, and our next steps. KSD is closely examining our workforce culture, specifically by listening to our workforce, all employee groups in our workforce. As district and association members work together to provide opportunities for every staff member to provide feedback about KSD, why they stay, and when they thought about leaving last, if they have, I want to propose and frame the big picture for us that we consider the outcomes of these conversations with a growth mindset, as Dr. Carol Dweck has outlined in her book, Mindset. A growth mindset recognizes that although there's work to be done in areas of improvement, growth and improvement can and will happen with effective effort. And we believe that in Human Resources, and we believe that in the Kent School District, and I know we believe that in our classrooms. This growth mindset is echoed by Dr. Brene Brown, author of Rising Strong and Dare to Lead, when she says, imperfections are not inadequacies. They are reminders that we are in this together. So I'd like to propose that we are together in this work to address our imperfections and to build a healthy and vibrant workforce. And we can and will do that. So with that in mind, I hand it over to our team to share what we've learned thus far.
So I'll just be starting with a brief overview of what phase one necessarily entailed. The big piece of that was group sessions. We held 4 group interview sessions, 1 at each high school. These were after hours, 5 to 6:30 at each event. They're open to all employee groups, open house style. They could come in, complete the 4 questions, leave when they were done. We had a total of 37 participants at the total of the 4 events. Those that could not attend, we gave multiple options. We had 2 request individual interviews, so I did go out to their school locations. They would like a face-to-face. Those that could not attend and did not want to have a face-to-face interview had a few options to respond. The first was email or by the courier. We did have 5 responses there. And then we sent out the targeted email survey a little bit later in the fall for employees that were identified as influencers in their building. We did have 47 responses, which was a 24% response rate of the 196 that were sent out. I'd like to just also note that the data that we're showing you is just from phase 1. Phase 2 actually has started, which I'll point a little bit more, talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. But what you're going to see here is just from these 4 avenues. I'm going to, once again, this is the team that went through all 91 responses, and I'll turn it over to Jacqueline to talk about how we went through the responses.
So at each one of our group sessions, we had a great team of interviewers, and their job during the interviews were to put down as best as they could, word for word, what our interviewees were articulating in their responses. And all of those responses were put into a shared database that our team was able to look through. Each one of us on the team were then delegated a specific question that we kind of went through with a fine-tooth comb. And we broke each question down into the fundamental pieces or statements and then created categories based on those pieces that were mentioned in those comments. This is an example on the board, a large view of one of those Excel spreadsheets where we basically tagged pieces of the comment for each category. So for example, I stay at my school because I love my administrator. We'd hashtag that with an X, administrator. And then based on those comments, we would go through each one and quantify the number of times each one of those categories were mentioned. Now, we didn't create categories ahead of time because we wanted to make sure that we were really looking at each comment individually and the individual experiences that each one of our interviewers were bringing to our group sessions. We had up to 45 categories for some of those questions, and some were pretty specific and had really common responses based on our interviewees. And last but not least, once we had gone through individually with our questions, we then as a team peer edited and looked across all of the questions to make sure that we didn't miss things as an individual reader, and that we truly were capturing the patterns or trends that were emerging from each one of those questions. So here are those patterns and themes based on each question.
So the first question that we looked at is, why do you stay with KSD? And 4 areas emerged. The first one was colleagues, and we heard that staff love the colleagues that they work with and feel supported by them, not just subject specific colleagues, but also support staff and certificated staff. And then also that they felt supported by administration. And tagged along with that was that they felt that their administrator had a vision that they could really follow, and it would navigate them. A second area that we looked at, or that emerged, was students. That staff felt that they could influence the student groups that they worked with, and that they had an impact on those students. And they also echoed the idea that they appreciated the diversity that KSD has. The third group that we looked, the third area that emerged was proximity to home. There's a lot of staff members that actually live within the district. Their spouses work here, their kids go to school here. But I would also add to that there was a feeling of community among staff members who don't live within the community. They opt to drive here for a reason, and for some of them, they opt to put their kids within the district. The fourth area that came out was longevity. Some related that it was because they were close to retirement, but many also said that they were in the district by choice and that they had opted to be here for a long period of time for a reason, and that it was an investment for them and they didn't want to change at this point. And then also that they knew the district well and that they felt comfortable with the district.
All right, so on to question 2. So when was the last time you thought about leaving KSD and what prompted it? And out of this question, we saw 5 really prominent trends. The first being behavior management. A lot of these results were actually regarding specific incidents, which actually can have an effect on our staff and have them evaluate their employment. And there was also concerns about the effectiveness of our behavior programs and implementation and areas for possible training within that scope. The second one were concerns with district leadership, and kind of the subcategories that are composed of that are lack of communication, lack of trust, and a feeling of disconnect with the buildings and district administration. The third one were concerns with district and union collaboration. And what was interesting to me about this was it was not skewed one way or another. There was just a presumed impression of lack of collaboration, not on one side of union or district collaboration, but just an overall presumed impression of lack of collaboration. The next was the budget and availability of resources. And this was not just physical resources, things like availability of copy paper, but also resources regarding staffing. And so, staff with longevity kind of maybe used to have different resources than they do now. And so that kind of sense of disconnect between maybe what was available in the past and what was available now. And then the impact on salaries. And we saw mostly a comparison with other districts for comparable positions and how salaries differ between KSD and other districts. And finally, the RIF, and that had an impact on job security and the feeling of job security. And then the turnover impact, newer staff maybe putting more responsibility on some of our older staff.
So question 3, how can KSD improve your work experience? So the 4 main topics that emerged from here were improving professional development opportunities, so not only just the quantity, but also the relevance to what we're doing. Curriculum training, it was spoken about that oftentimes curriculum was announced and implemented before proper training could possibly be given. Quantity of training, sometimes some of the more popular trainings were full and only offered once or maybe twice a year when maybe it should have been offered more. There was a lot of talk about cohesion between the buildings and district administration, that again, echoing that there's a disconnect kind of between what's happening here at district and what's happening down at the buildings. So just a feeling that those that are making decisions don't fully understand the work that is being done at buildings. A lot of talk about trusting employees to make decisions. A big thing that came from this is that everyone echoed that individual schools have individual student populations, and oftentimes a big decision is made at the district, and they want the ability to kind of tweak those decisions to fit their specific school. Additionally, better communication just overall from the district. Open and transparent and also timely, hearing about things before they happen when and if at all possible, which includes policy and procedures once they're changed, making sure that's communicated to our district staff.
And the last and probably most clear cut of the questions was number 4, which is who are you connected to in your building and what is your work support system? And this is an important question because so often people stay within their jobs, even if it's a difficult one, because they have that support network of colleagues and community members. And so probably the most overwhelming response were coworkers and colleagues and building administrators. And these support systems were not necessarily just grade level, but also within their subject academic areas or support staff within the building. And key terms that were used around building administrators were that they had a strong relationship with their supervisor and that their supervisors were working really hard to provide them as best as they could the support that they need to best serve their students. Also mentioned was outside of work support, family and friends, which we know is important no matter what job you're in, that family and friendship support to make the work a little less heavier. And last but not least, there was mention of students as well. A specific comment that stood out to me was an interviewee said, even after my students leave me, they come back years later and visit me, tell me about their future endeavors and things that are going well for them, which is a source of inspiration and an affirming feedback for that teacher in order to keep doing what they do. Beyond our 4 questions, we looked for overarching themes, and some of them have been mentioned already, attached to specific questions. 2 of them I'll re-articulate. One is that there seems to be, whether in reality or based on perception, that there's a real disconnect between our site-based locations in schools and the central administration office and leadership. And so things that were conveyed were a desire to have more outreach to buildings and physical presence in our different sites so that our leadership and our central administration office have a full picture, not only from stories from our staff members, but in having walked through the halls and seeing students' needs and how best they can be supported and how big decisions can have great impact on the everyday goings-on in a building. Additionally, re-articulating the need and desire for stronger, frequent, more timely, and relevant communication, especially on the proactive end, so that all of our staff can be informed and best prepared for future questions that they might get from students and staff and families that come and ask them as well. Additionally, there was a real strong indication that people are really pleased with their administrators and the supports that they are provided by those leaders in our buildings, and that our administrative team is doing a really good job, which is something to celebrate. While there were a number of interviewees that relayed that currently they're not feeling super positive about where we are as a district, that they also had a sense of hope, and that because they've been here for a while, they know what our district can be, and that they want to be partners in the solution, and that they feel led to stay because they want to see our district return to what in their minds was the golden days, or what we could be even better in the future. And so that was really positive to hear that so many staff, while articulating concerns that they had a strong sense of hope for what we could be in the future.
So going through this data, I definitely had to kind of keep in mind that all feedback is good feedback, and hoping to make some really good changes from what we've learned. We are definitely not done with the data we collected in phase one. We, of course, looked for just the big patterns and trends. We hope to be diving a little bit deeper into some of the actionable items that were brought up, but until we get to that, didn't want to go full report. So looking into phase two, so phase two will consist of individual in-person interviews that will happen during work hours, and that was a big chunk of the feedback we got before, is not a lot of people were available from 5 to 6:30 at night. We will be sending out just notifications to schools as we make a schedule when we'll be there, and providing some sign-up opportunities. This has actually already started with our partners with KEA. We met with them before break, discussing how they could help. They have a little bit more time and have started reaching out to buildings and meeting with their staff, asking the same for questions. They're collecting that data, and that way when we go out to buildings, we can do a kind of a second run through any teachers that are also still interested or couldn't make an original interview, but then we can focus more on some classified staff and hopefully have a little bit more time. Facilitators, we're still seeking out more that are interested, since we do have quite a few locations to seek out, but we'll be starting that process hopefully in early February.
So as we come back to where we started, our next step from a big picture is to coordinate with the Community of Organizational Effectiveness regarding the staff climate survey, which I said is going out this spring. We continue to do our exit survey and interview process. We will be presenting the 2018-2019 Workforce Retention Report in the late spring that will include the full picture, phase one, phase two, and all of the other pieces that we've mentioned, and identify action steps and a cross-representational team to address our workforce retention issues. It's very important that we're not just gathering data, we're not just looking at patterns and trends. It is for a purpose. And as I shared before, effective effort means that we have to make very strategic moves to address what our workforce has said. These are areas that we need to improve upon. I go back to that piece of hope and optimism. We do have a workforce staff that believes that we can get there together. I know that. And so as they continue to see us put these things into place, we are excited about the continued improvement that we're going to see in our schools and buildings. With that, I'll give you the opportunity to ask any questions.
All right. Director Daniels.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is really good information. I was wondering if, and I'm sure you guys maybe do have the information around, like what were the grade levels of, I mean, where did you see, was there an area where you saw a lot of response versus not so much, or was it pretty even over the workforce? Was it?
So we didn't really request a lot of identifying information. So just based on some people's comments, I'd say it was pretty widespread. I know we got a lot of different employee groups. I know we saw teachers, paras, custodians, and administrators, just based on what they said, of course, that we could tell where they were from, but that was after looking at the data. So I wouldn't know from grade level specific.
Okay. Well, that's great that there was a variety. That was one of my thoughts. Okay, thank you.
I'm really pleased to hear that they feel they're supported by their building administrators. That's so important to have a really strong leader at every school. And that makes a huge difference, so that's great news. Two things that I think it would be interesting to go deeper. I don't know if it's maybe for our information, but on the behavior management, when they said that there were some schools that said that they weren't happy with the level of behavior training, whatever. We know that different schools are at different levels at MTSS, and we're just in the process of gearing up. So it was just wondering, I mean, you can't go back and do that, I guess, but I wonder where on the MTSS level those comments came from for various schools. So if it's a school that's at one of the lower levels and just start, gearing up at this point.
We can actually go deeper. In the stay interview process, we're sticking with these 4 questions, but as we see really strong patterns and trends, we can dive deeper with our staff to say this came out in the workforce retention study as a concern. We'd like to survey, learn a little bit more, and really ask some much more pointed questions.
Yeah, and another one too is the cohesion between the buildings and the district. They don't feel like what is it that they don't feel like we're hearing? What is it that they need that they don't feel like they're getting? So just, it's just taking it a little bit further.
I just had one more comment about depending on what school. So I met with Tim Martin, who's one of the KEA representatives this morning, and as they started going out, he just made some mention that when we're going to individual schools, it's a little bit easier to kind of see what trend you're seeing by school, and then we'll be able to make more actionable items after that.
Yeah. Good. All right, that's all I had.
I think most of my questions have been asked already. I am pleased to see that we're partnering with KEA on this process to get that information. Are we partnering with any of our other unions as well to help get their members as far as interviews?
So anytime that we're requesting volunteers or talking about partnering, so everything is being sent out to all labor groups, and a lot have expressed interest and just haven't had a chance. So definitely as we move forward, they will all be involved, or at least offered to be involved if they're interested.
Great, thank you.
Right. I just wanted to mention that I think some of the items that you mentioned regarding what staff really want to see, making decisions that the board also makes that affects the staff, and increasing that communication. I'm hoping we can figure that out, and I thank you for bringing that to our attention, because I'm really cognizant of that, especially some of the things that have recently happened. And then secondly, I wanted to ask about the exit interview, and if we would have, where's Maria? We would have the same level of oversight over the exit interview as we have with the stay interview, because I really feel like this is very impactful to have so many different views and just outside collaboration in doing this. So it's just a comment, I guess. I'd like to see the exit interview done similarly as opposed to just one person doing it. And
absolutely. I think this process was much richer having the team that we had with multiple perspectives. So absolutely, I agree as moving forward. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right. So if there are no other questions, so we want to thank you all for all your work.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for
really
listening.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to recess the work session for an oh, sorry, no.
Before we do that,
about
yeah, absolutely. Before we do that, I will ask
supposed to be first.
Melissa Laramie,
All right.
Director of Communications, Public Affairs, to present our board communication plan review. Thank you. Ms. Laramie, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Almost there.
Yes, we flipped it on you. It's okay, I understand.
Apologize, yes.
It's all right. President Venkatachalam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Halley, I am pleased this evening to present and talk about, it's a little bit different. Normally we get to sit around the table and have a conversation, but this evening I did put it into a presentation format for us to look at some data as we normally do each month, and then have a conversation about where we're at with the communications plan, and then we'll get to also have a review this evening. So there might be a little bit of a repeat this evening of some of the slides and information that you'll see, but we do get to have a discussion of some of the things coming up and where we're at this evening. So as always, we'll start out with some website analytics and data and information. And the first, the big jump that I'd like to show you, and information that we have, the most up-to-date information that we have, is on the Fiscal Recovery Task Force page. We saw last when we were together on December 3rd that there were about 139 views on that page. It had jumped to, when we were going to meet prior last week, to about 200
39 views by January 1st. And in the last week, we've had over 200 page views just in the last week with the new website. So I'm really excited. There's a couple different ways to get to that specific page. So I'm thinking with the new format and people checking out the new website and the new ways to access that page, that there's been an increase in the number of views. So that's exciting news. It's also led to 2 new applications, including a student application. So we've seen that number go up. So I'm really excited and pleased to report that. So those are the application completions that we have. We're still looking for a number of other employee group and other group applicants, but we are well on our way. We continue to also reach out and use all of our communication channels, social media, email, website, and all of our platforms as that deadline approaches on the 16th for those applications. So we continue to reach out and use those channels. So we're still pushing, and I'm hopeful, especially seeing that increase in views. That was exciting to see today. So that is the first bit of data that we have to review. With the break and everything that we had with winter vacation and some changes at one of the vendors that I'm familiar with from previous district, I wasn't able to get a meeting with myself and IT partners prior to today's meeting, but I am still working on getting a meeting scheduled to get demos and information for you on some of the platforms that we have available to us for this forward-facing, anonymous online solution that we've been talking about and what that could look like. So I want to bring you a couple different options, and I think timing has just been an issue, and so I apologize about that, but still working on that. So I want to bring you some detailed information and a couple tools to look at, and so we have that ongoing piece on our communications plan. So it's kind of one of those big hanging things that we're still working on. But I am confident, have been making some calls, and now know who to contact at one of the vendors, and we'll be scheduling that soon. We have a couple of videos that we need to do, so I'll be scheduling some time with a couple of you in the very near future to fulfill that part of our communications plan. So we renewed the video that we did in the fall for the community conversations, and those have been playing well on all of our social media platforms for the upcoming community conversations. But we have 2 other ones, and this is really around fulfilling that your goal around helping our public understand what the role of the board is. And so we have those other 2 videos that we identified that would really help people understand. And I think this is very timely as we think about bringing on our students onto the board and some other things that are happening this year. So I think it's a great opportunity, especially as we think about, as we look at the data of the board views and who's coming, and we think about the cadence of how we've changed some of the things at the meetings and what we're doing, so we can really incorporate some of those things and be thoughtful about how does the meeting work, how do public comments work. And so I think it's a good time at the middle of the year now to really execute those videos. So we're excited to work with you on those. So expect an email from Casey and I, and we'll work with you on those. Continuing to monitor the live stream, we did move forward with the lovingly called set it and forget it option, and that has been working. And we also had the opportunity to test out our backup option, and that worked as well. And so we're excited because this is essentially a no-cost option for us. And so we're not dipping into any funds, and really we're able to provide live streaming of all of the work sessions, the board meetings, and have it live streamed for our public and have it up right away. We also have a backup option, so if there's any interruptions at all to our live stream, we also have a backup running at the same time and can put that up within 2 days of the board meeting should anything happen to that live stream. So we're constantly checking it as soon as the board meeting begins, making sure that it's live, and then checking it at the end of the evening or the next morning as well. So these are the views and our current views. So we have that data. And you also have the sheets in front of you, right, that we normally have? Okay. Newsletter data. So we continue, and I apologize, this is a misprint. This top data is the December, we didn't send two in November. It's actually the December data. Continue to see really great open rates. 30% is much higher than industry standard. So 30% open rates, and then your click-through rates remain steady as well. People who are unsubscribing, it's really low, and it's not alarming to me at all. I think that happens, and remember, those can be people who've perhaps moved out of district, or they've changed from Hotmail to Gmail, or they've moved from a job, or they're like, ooh, I shouldn't have personal email coming to work, so I'm going to go ahead and move it to Gmail. So it could be any of those things. But for the December newsletters, the numbers remain steady. And so that's the December newsletter information. And then looking ahead, we have, of course, the January content that's due on Monday. Is that Monday? The 11th? Friday, sorry. Friday, and then the application's due on the 16th. Community conversations. I do have the flyer, the English flyer ready, and almost all of our 5-language flyers, remember we talked about in December having the top 5 languages, they're almost all done. One of our translators that we normally use was not available over the break, so that one, she just needed a little bit more time, but that'll be done, and then I just need them to proof them once we made all of the changes to make sure all of the breaks and everything still reads correctly after we formatted them. So those will also be ready, and we can definitely have those on the website and also send them in your newsletter. And that'll be just in time. And of course, we'll put them on Peachjar as well. So really excited to provide that for this round of your community conversations. And then as we talked about, posting the responses by the February 6th, which gives us a little bit more time than the last time. So it gives us a few extra days to be certain of the content that we're posting and the answers, and time to collaborate, which is also one of our communications work session days. So we'll be able to have a conversation that day. Cognizant of the fact that Day on the Hill is coming up, that was mentioned at our last board meeting during your comments, and had a great conversation with our superintendent's student leadership advisory today, and also mentioned that to them that we'll be getting those invites out soon, because we need to start planning for that, because that's going to be here before we know it. And of course, our February newsletter also seems like that's going to be coming right around the corner, and then it'll be winter break. So I know there were other questions, so I wanted to just make sure that we had the data in front of you, and then make sure we left time before our work session ended.
Right. Yes, Bill, go ahead.
I don't think I have. Can you
Okay,
start?
yeah, I can start. I have several, so do you want
I
to
have
start?
one.
Okay,
So I
go
know
ahead.
we kind of had a theme for November, or not November, whatever month we're in now, January. I sent my thing about students and Day on the Hill to Ross. He's replied back to me. I want to make one quick, I want to add one more sentence that I thought of today, and then I'll send it off to you, so we'll have that one. But do we have a theme for February newsletter? I know we talked a little bit. Was there something that we were trying to put
Well,
in February?
we still have to do January about classes.
Right.
Class experience, right? Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I know.
I don't know if but we're.
No,
I
I
would
haven't
love to
jumped
see-
into
I think, yeah.
February yet. Still
think
waiting to
ahead.
finish January. Well, I mean, it's open,
Right.
like, what do
Yeah.
you
I
all
would-
want to do? What do you all want to talk about?
Well, I'm going to throw an idea. I would love to see
Yeah.
Black History Month.
Like
If we did
History
something
Month?
about African American History Month,
Okay,
I think that would be
okay.
appropriate.
Okay, to write about, okay. So I do want to clarify on that. I know we've gone on this theme track, but frankly, you know, the get to know, I think we can add whatever we want to add. We don't have to stick to a theme. Like if somebody doesn't have music experience or talent, I don't want them to feel forced to write something about it, you know? You know? So I think we need to kind of think about that. You know, I've thrown out theme because I'm excited to hear about I think several of us have gone through classroom experiences and we've had some on our own. So that's just something I threw out, but doesn't prevent you from putting whatever you want to put in there. A book, recipe, whatever you wish to share. Okay, all right. Want to be clear on that. Karen, any comments?
Just mechanics of it, are we sending to you first and then you send to Melissa?
Yes,
Or instead
yes.
of, okay.
Friday,
All right.
yeah.
I know what I'm going to do. And I have a picture.
Okay, yeah, all right. Debbie doesn't have any photos.
I don't take
She
photos.
won't take photos.
Ask my
so-
kids. There are no photos.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so it's just an internal dialogue. All right. Okay, so got everybody? So I have several. I wanted to talk about student presentations.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I figured you
why
would
don't
trigger
go
me.
ahead?
Right.
Go ahead,
I
Denise.
apologize, I didn't bring.
okay.
So yes, one of the things that I have heard from other school board members that I've come across is that one of the ways that they kind of, keep the student focus is they start each school board meeting with a student presentation or something from our students. And I thought that would be awesome. I mean, I would love to see, I don't think there's a shortage of talent or students who'd want to come and share, whatever that looks like. Doesn't have to be, it could be, what they're doing in class, a particular class, or CTE, all kinds of things. I think that it would be really good for us to hear from them at our meetings, and I think that would kind of, for me, that's why we're here. And so it's just kind of a nice reminder of, of what they're doing. And it's always interesting to hear because I know they've got a lot going on. So that was something that I would like to, if possible, talk about implementing just for the first few minutes of each school board meeting, whatever that looked like, to invite students to come and share.
I know we had at one point, I don't remember how many years ago it was, where we had a class where they were doing I think.
Avid.
Yeah. Well, no, it was an Avid. It was actually an elementary class that was doing a partnership with another school in like China. And they actually, because of the way the time frame works, they actually came and did part of their sharing here. So they repeated a poem in Chinese and in English, and the opposite group did, and it was really, really cool to see that. So
The Sister Cities folks can help with that. John Howard.
Yeah, I received your email, and so I reached out to several of my colleagues at different districts, and I know there's a lot of different ways that we could do it, and so I think, there's boards that travel to different schools to do their meetings. I think that there's some that invite different schools, kind of like what you were talking about, like themes, so for like, when we're celebrating art this month, or we're celebrating science or STEM this month, or music this month, and different things like that. I definitely think it's a possibility. One of the recurring things I heard was that it was part of a plan that was done in advance. So I think it would be something maybe that would be implemented for next school year, because I think starting at mid-year might be somewhat difficult working with our schools at this point, but it's definitely something we could explore. I do think for some of our schools, and definitely for some of our students, I do hear and wonder about the timing. Just our meeting starts a little bit later than some of our other school boards, and some of our neighbors, it doesn't. Their meeting starts a little bit earlier. So for some of the younger kiddos, it might be a little bit late. And for some of the older ones, they might be at work. So I think there's just some of those things that with a little bit of time. So I wasn't sure if you had a timeline in mind, if you were thinking this school year or sometime soon, or if you had specific programs or things that you had been at recently that you had in mind. That would like a helpful place for me to start with, or.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. And actually, because I did have that discussion with one of the board members, and sometimes they actually videotape, so that if there's a performance at a school, they'll actually do a video, and then they'll show the video at the school board meeting. So it's
Gotcha.
not that they don't always have to come
and be live.
So it's just kind of starting with a student presentation of sorts.
Understood.
Whatever that looks like, because
Okay.
I know that is, in particular, the younger kids, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Or it could be a snippet from a play, right, that's happening, or a concert or something, that we could just, get a little snapshot of.
Okay.
I know Melissa and I discussed earlier, and actually did have this conversation with our student leaders.
Yeah.
And they're, as you think about this, I know we may be funneling our thought process to a fine arts presentation that, and in my mind, I'm thinking about an orchestra or a chorus, and that would be grand. I also think that we need to also keep in mind that, to your point, whether it's a one act delivery of some form of performing arts, or it's students coming to the school board meeting to be greeters. We heard many of our students ask, how can we accumulate community service hours? And I know there are school districts that use our students, our primary customers, to help as greeters or support, as you mentioned. I think it's the perfect opportunity to remind each and every one of us of why we do what we do and for whom we serve. Yeah. So I think there's many different ways to approach this, but I think if I'm hearing correctly, the answer is unabashedly yes. We want to make sure we can include our students in our board meetings and opening them with our students as a reminder, and we can talk about how. I think the why and the what and the when.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm full support.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. The other things that I wanted to bring up, well, first I wanted to thank our principals in the high schools and also our CBOs. I did put out an email to folks to spread the word about the Fiscal Recovery Task Force to our CBOs. Several organizations, and also our high school principals, so that could explain the number of views going up. This was done after the holidays. So I wanted to thank them for doing that, and several principals responded back saying that they are sending it out and they've got some good people. So that, and then something that came up recently was, first I wanted to ask also about the email, the open rates. One of the things I noticed this time around is that I didn't get my community email. And so I wasn't sure if there was some type of purging or something done this particular round. Typically, I get it on my community email as well as my district email, so that it is duplicated, but this time in December, I didn't get the community one. So, yeah, so I wanted to find out if
I can look into it.
Cleanup getting done, which would change the numbers. And then I wanted to ask about the seniors, our senior citizens. I was meeting with a couple of community members the other day, and they're frankly completely in the dark about what is happening in our district because they're not part of social media, and they do not see these email newsletters that are going out. So I'm sort of curious about our senior citizens, if we have some data on, and how are we reaching out to our senior citizen communities as well.
I don't have any data for you at hand. We do have our Winter Connected, which is going out this month, which goes out to all residents in our district. It's our printed mailer that goes out every year. And so every resident will get a copy. And so we're excited to send that out. And so I think that's one way that we can connect them. And there's a lot of rich stories that are in there about what's going on, everything from graduation to the new Covington Elementary. And so we are cognizant of the fact that online is not the only way that everybody gets their news. And so that is a great reminder to think about that.
Like, how can they even subscribe if they're interested? You know, can they subscribe?
To online?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, how
absolutely.
do we reach out to them? I mean, through the Kent Reporter or something, can we put a message saying how to? I think people don't even know how to subscribe to those newsletters. So I think those fundamentals have to be somehow.
Okay. We can definitely talk about that in our team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then a question came up about the schools being closed, all the schools being closed. You know, I think it would be good to, and some of the parents chimed in as to the reason why that happened, and there were some good explanations, but I think our district should probably put in explanation as to why we closed some schools and why we why we closed all schools and not just the ones that were impacted. But I think the explanations have happened in the past, like with our snow issue. I think 2013, we had a huge concern there, and a lot of explanations went out in terms of security and where staff live and how we're monitoring that. Somehow, if we can start explaining some of the decisions we're making to the public, I think that would help as well. Although I do feel like it was handled really well, but I think questions still, you know, come up from families. And then I did want to ask about the new website and what are the things that you are learning from the new website, like any lessons learned, what could we have done better, or what's really working, or what's the feedback you're getting?
Absolutely. So we have several modes of several different opportunities and ways that we're getting feedback. Obviously, direct feedback, emails. We have a survey form. We're talking to people. We're going to different groups. But the decision, the choice for the theme of the website was actually decided on by a group of parents, community members, staff, about well over a year ago, of a group that came together. So that was decided in 2016. I think it was summer of 2016. And so then there was work done. Since we've launched, we've received a lot of feedback from staff, community members, parents, and students even. And students and parents are overwhelmingly happy with the website and excited about it. Staff are still getting used to the changes. So the old website was a lot of internal information that was placed on the external website. And so our staff were comfortable going to the external website for internal information forms and processes that really were only used for internal purposes. An example may be a printing request form for our print shop that only does services for staff and for schools. No outside vendor or person or community member could ever use that form. Only staff could. But it was quicker to go to that form than to go to Staff Link, and so it just became easy and habit. And so now that form is no longer there, and it's still available. It's on the forms, and it's 2 clicks on the internal staff website, but it's just not the same place that it was bookmarked before for them. And so it's just a change. We had a great conversation again today with our students, and they said basically the same thing, that they love the website. It's fresh and clean and modern and really easy to navigate. And they're still kind of getting used to where things are, but they love it. So it's change. Change. Dr. Watts was talking to the students today about a quote that he read recently, that change is hard in the beginning, messy in the middle, and gorgeous in the end. And so I would say we're in the messy middle. But really excited to be there. We are also now compliant, and we had to change our website because of the complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. And so it was a must. It wasn't a should we. So.
All right, thank you. And then finally, I just wanted to ask, we have 2 videos coming up, and so I'd really like for us, rather than just drafting the bit, the script, I think it would be helpful to hear from our students on what it is. I was having a conversation with Austin here earlier, and I think it would be helpful. He had some really good questions. Why does the board do it this way? Why do we do it that way? And there are several clarifications that I need to make tonight as well on some of the questions that are out there. And when it's not answered, people jump to conclusions, and that's when things get tricky. So I really think in the interest of doing this communication thing really well, I think we need to kind of ask, what is it that you'd like to know? And I don't know exactly how we would do it. I mean, maybe by next meeting with our students, we can ask them, what is it that you'd like to know from the board before we jump into having a script for this video. Just some thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I'm excited to continue to help facilitate the communications plan, but it is your board communications plan. So certainly just here to serve, and so however you'd like to go about it, I'm happy to help facilitate that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you all have any thoughts on it. I'm just throwing it out.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I do have a question. So with our student leadership, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to hear from students who aren't necessarily in leadership, right? Because I don't know if we get the voice of all of our kids all the time, right? Or as many voices as we can, because we do tend to focus on those students who stand out and stand a little bit above. So I'd love to see some type of opportunity to give students at large an opportunity to have some information or to comment or participate in some of the activities that we do as well. So I'm not sure what that looks like right now, but that was just something that came to mind as we kept talking about student leadership, and I'm thinking, well, there's so many more students.
So, Director Daniels, if I can say that quite frankly, our student leaders, and they're all leaders. They may not know it, but they're all leaders. So we just simply call this forum Student Leadership Advisory. They are intuitive, and they've essentially said exactly what you want. We want to have opportunities to have our voice, and they weren't speaking for themselves. They were speaking on behalf of all students. So I think we can certainly come up with many ways, whether it's hearing from students during lunch or at an assembly. We need to, and I don't disagree with. There are ways that we can do that. I had some follow-up questions for you.
And nothing against student leadership. I'm just
Absolutely.
saying.
No,
I love.
Yes.
They're fantastic. I just wonder about the opportunity for others.
We did have some of our students that have come in the past for like their civics class when they've come and they've talked, and talking to some of them afterwards, that was one of the things they expressed as well. It would be great even if, board members could come to a classroom or, when it's on civics or something, or even an assembly, and just have where they could ask questions. So I know our students have asked about that as well.
And I apologize. They're just heavy on my mind. I was just with them a few hours ago, so they're just top of my mind. So.
And I think when we talk about that, sometimes it's the ASB groups. We always kind of fixate on that kind of when we say leadership, it's a fixed group, but, so I think that's what you're referring to.
That
is what I was saying.
Absolutely, no, I understand.
So it's not the student leadership
Yes,
group.
that's what I'm saying, but they're all leaders, they just,
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
You had
I
a
did,
follow-up?
just a follow-up
Yeah,
on,
sure.
you mentioned, and there's a question that sparked something regarding our senior citizens. And while we may not know exactly where all of our individuals who identify as senior citizens reside, I thought specifically about past levy or bond communications where we had targeted communication to our specific constituents and community members. I personally attended several of our senior citizen assisted living centers, so that's one area where I know there's an opportunity to present or share, but I wanted just to clarify if that's what you were referring to or one aspect of communication.
Yeah, I want us to not just go to our senior citizens when there's a bond and a levy.
No. So
I think, they need to be informed about what's happening.
Right. That's the
the
example I was
budget,
using,
yeah,
right.
all of these
Absolutely.
things on a regular basis. So how do we get to them without having to necessarily go there and present all the time? I mean, that's a great thing to do in community outreach is something that we all should be doing. Is there a way to invite them to our community conversations? That could be another, just do a special invite. So yes, how do we reach them beyond bonds and levies?
Right. And to be clear, that was an example. I think I was using, but more importantly, I wanted to make sure that if whatever we need to communicate, we can have community meeting there, or but my question really was, is it the actual location, or are we looking at mailers? I think just a few more questions I have. Some wondering.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a cost issue, and I don't know what that is, but they are our constituents,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
we have to, regardless whether they have children, they have grandchildren, so
Yes.
it's really important. But it's something to think about.
Thank you.
What about holding one of our community conversations at the
Yeah.
senior center?
It's a great idea.
That would work.
And advertise that.
Okay.
Great idea.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
All right.
Thank you.
So, anybody else? Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yes, and I also want to say thank you for putting up with our late submissions. We're going to try and get better at that, because I know that's really hardship on all of you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we are now recessing. Okay, we will now recess the work session for an executive session for approximately 30 minutes to review the qualifications of an applicant for public employment.
So you're going to introduce Janine Weber.
Saturday, or no, Sunday, hour, yes, with a P. P is in, petunias, I don't know. Yeah, my power got knocked out Sunday, I just got it back last night.
It's coming late, right? It's coming late, right?
Okay, I'll just make a note there.
Tell us the truth. Tell us, kick us in the butt.
I just took it out, I didn't think it'd be that long.
We don't know.
I know, I thought it was last year, I was like, just I spent almost 2 days at Anderson.
Sundays, constructive. Shouldn't have to be yes.
Like right now? Okay, how are your thoughts about it? I know, but like, yeah, and like vegetables or some kind of protein in it, yeah, like ham or whatever, yeah, bacon, whatever, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yay. Ah, yes. Oh, yeah, that sounds cute. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty similar. Oh, look at you, you're becoming just such a chef. Oh, I thought of you the other day. I'm at a school board meeting. Well, because I was looking on Pinterest, and I found eggplant bacon that apparently tastes just like bacon, it just has eggplant, so it's not actual like fat powder. No? Okay. I thought you said, I'm like, I wonder how many points that is for Jess. That way she can still have kind of bacon. Not there yet, no. Yeah, they should. Oh, I thought of you though. I was like, oh, there's Jess. What is it? What was it? He said they'll have it out. If it was a tank top, then I'm like, no, I'd never worry about it. So I appreciate you saying no. I appreciate that very much. No. I appreciate you thinking of me though. That's gonna be your first time to your brain when I see the water stuff. Just like when I see pink camel stuff, that's Jess right there. Jess needs that in her life, just like cow. Yep, only you, Jess, you're the one who owns that title, so you should covet that. Okay, you need to stop being sick. You did? Why? You are going to start your master's? Yay! Well, hold on, we're going to get it through. Or get it from. Okay, you didn't. Yeah, no, I did. I'm trying to think of where that is. That's not the school that you called way back last February. No, it was not. Right, okay. Soon. Okay. That's a good one. So then, what are you going to get like your master's in? Like, are you going to try to get it in literature? Oh, that's going to be great. That's going to be really good. So then can I ask the really bad question? How much is it going to cost you out of pocket? But then does your district though, like us, like does it bump you really high up on the pay scale? Okay, good. Okay, well that's even. Oh, awesome. Oh, you're fine. Wouldn't bother me at all. Right. I know, I kind of saw that, like, over last week. Moving along. Yeah, you're moving along.
Indoors. Yeah, that's step one. You're actually learning. It's not that much work.
Oh, look at you, Jess. You're growing up so fast.
You're needed on the KSD.
Doesn't seem.
lot of people who don't see your wasting anything.
So both of us had to then turn around and scoot right back out when we were going different directions. You have to think about it.
I know. My daughter's just I get where you're coming from. I need to be spot in between where I need to get used to paying everything on my own first with stuff that I can more or less call somebody else to come fix before it is all on me and I'm screwed. I know it's true, but also free spinning allowed. It's not, I'm writing the Bible. Stop it. Oh yeah, oh god, yes. No, I'm gonna be doing Pokemon all morning, and then I'm gonna be over at Dana's house, probably closer to like 4:30. But I'm gonna bring in some kind of seafood, fish, prawn or shrimp, some kind of seafood. Oh, so then we can deep fry. That is on Friday, but Saturday is the community day, so it starts at 11 a.m. and it gets over with at 2. So it's community day. So you go out and you can catch as many Pokemon as you can. Some of them are shiny, and you get a special move. And yeah, I'm totally gonna get all geeked out. It's very exciting. I meet Miss Nicole out there, out in the wilderness. It probably will. Like, where'd you get the recipe from? Are you winging this all on your own? You don't even have a guide? Or is it your dad? You wouldn't understand. I hope he does. True. I think. I've never eaten a lot of sushi, so I'm going to assume yes. You just got thrown out. Yep, and you learn next time, call your dad and be like, Dad, what do I do? Just give me a baseline. Just give me a baseline of what to do.
Morgan?
Yes, she's one of my best friends.
We're gonna hang out.
Awesome! I went to college with her in March.
Oh my god, oh my
Dad, I
god.
have stories where it's like, I don't know what's going on. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. When you became a teacher, we're like, teacher? And then it became a principal relationship. Yay! No, I'm sorry. I recommend it. I'm sorry. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I can't answer that.
Have fun.
I hope for you it's not. I hope for you it's not him. I don't know. I said I hope for you it's not him, but I don't know. Because you just sounded very, very kind of, I hope it's not him, and you asked me if it was Shane or not. I was like, wait, oh.
Get all, I can convince, influence, get more money.
No, and I'm gonna totally die of boredom and be like, just let me sleep, just please let me sleep. No, even though I told everybody last week about this, and I told them 2 weeks ago about this, and I put a reminder on the calendar about this.
So,
It's just, I'm alright.
hopefully.
Have you guys left yet? That, and I think it's because it's a 7 o'clock thing. You know what I mean? If it was like a 5 or a 5:30, but because Lori needs aspirin and I need water. Instead of a teacher directed Wednesdays. Okay, we'll see her. You know, the second turn's 4:05, people are out the door gone. But I'm here though. I'm doing my due diligence, Jess. So you be He's so proud. He's so proud. I'm doing sort of the same type of. I know. And I don't like this.
Of internal employees, teaching them how to use tools and stuff, and teaching the sellers that sell them.
And and I hope your quiche comes out beautifully.
Of all the things local.
Bye.
It's like they have an selling platform and programs. The marketing people and offerings, right? Like if we have a new shipping program, like, hey, it's going to be with these terms of your time, how you need to walk through the steps to get to it. So like marketing and
Yeah.
especially the operations. Yeah. Right. Maybe we can like make this a little more. So kind of the same work, as a different audience, and it's nice because I actually sit in marketing.
Oh, is that how many kids you have?
Yeah.
But they still transition hot over? Those just counts for these guys. Tell me what that's like. I'm used to. I know they. So what about this?
More just
I still got my elbow in it, so I'm good.
Yeah.
Hello. Non-agenda item, that's quite all right. Excellent. This is really bright. How do I make you less bright?
Follow them on Instagram, track them all the time.
I walked through there one time. I cannot believe it. It's just like, well, yeah, it's just so much stuff.
He has no room. He gets a big
Everything's over in your shop. Yeah. You know, she'll be exceedingly difficult to replace. Everybody in the hardware.
Karen and I found this tag on the floor. 1992. These chairs look like about 92.
Yeah.
Surprised me. The whole range of things. She was like whipping around the spreadsheet. And you know, there's some people.
How was that cooked dinner?
And the first.
Yeah. Well, or if you hook up so that's rough.
Not really
enough.
That was boring.
How long?
Average is an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes.
That's almost the best.
I have books online, presentations,
So does it take you longer to come or to go?
Go home. So I come in.
It wasn't too bad. Going, especially on Friday. But pretty much. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
stretch from when you're getting off of a meeting. That 4 miles. I know, right? Well, I will see what you pretty good. Really? Has that affected your career? You figured it out.
Good evening, everyone. We'd like to reconvene and call the regular meeting to order, and I'd like to ask Ms. Laramie to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening again, everyone. Welcome. This is the meeting of the Kent School District School Board, and which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. And the purpose of the board meetings is for the board to conduct its business in public. During the meeting, the board will listen to but not respond to comments from visitors. Those wishing to comment must complete a comment card and give it to the board secretary before the meeting begins, or no later than agenda item 3.0 presentations. There will be no cards that'll be accepted once these presentations have begun. And I know in the past I've been kind of flexible, but it has thrown us off, so we won't be accepting any cards after 3.0 presentations. Any abusive public comments personally directed towards staff members will not be tolerated. And when it is your turn to address the board, please state your name at the start of the testimony. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and you will hear a timer when 3 minutes are up. Visitors who have completed a comment card indicating a desire to speak to an agenda item will be called at that portion of the agenda. And per board procedure, written material to provide board members with background information should be submitted to the superintendent's office at least 1 week in advance of the meeting. So, Dr. Watts, are there any changes to the agenda, please?
Yes, President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Ms. Howley, please note that a supplemental personnel report was added to the consent agenda. It is before you on the dais.
All right. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion.
I move that we add the supplemental personnel report to the consent agenda.
All right. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. A motion has been made to move the supplemental personnel report added to the consent agenda. Are there any discussions or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. And if you wouldn't mind, raise your right hand. We'll start a new process. All right. Say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye. All right. All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. All right. Motion passes. And sorry to throw something new to the mix, just because last meeting, as you recall, we had lots of confusion as to who said yes and no, and it's very hard for Karen Howley to hear. All right, we are moving on to our 2.0 recognition, School Board Recognition Month. And Dr. Watts, if you would like to read the proclamation, please.
Absolutely. To our esteemed elected officials and school board directors, Kent School District, whereas the mission of Washington's public school system is to assure that all students achieve at high levels and possess the knowledge and skills to be responsible citizens of a democratic society who enjoy productive and satisfying lives. And whereas Washington's 295 locally elected school boards and 9 elected educational service district boards are the core of the public education governance system in our state. And whereas the districts and regions they lead serve more than 1 million students, have a combined annual budget of over $15 billion and employ approximately 120,000 people. And whereas school directors play a crucial role in promoting student learning and achievement by creating a vision, establishing policies and budgets, in setting clear standards of accountability for all involved. And whereas school directors are directly accountable to the citizens in their districts and regions, serving as a vital link between members of the community and their schools. And whereas school directors in educational service districts provide a passionate voice of advocacy for public schools and the welfare of school children. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize school directors as outstanding volunteers and champions for public education. Now, therefore, I, Jay Inslee, Governor of the State of Washington, do hereby proclaim January 2019 as School Board Recognition Month in Washington, and I encourage all people in our state to join me in this special observance. Congratulations. On behalf of Governor Inslee, I present President Vengadaslam the proclamation. You can go to the podium if you'd like.
We're good. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Watts.
Thank you.
And all of you.
And at this time, I will call on Faith Sisley to begin the presentation because we've just begun the celebration by saying a few words of appreciation.
That's
Faith,
right. We've
yours.
just begun. Board President Maya Vengadaslam and school board members, Dr. Watts and Ms. Halley, it's my privilege to continue with the celebration tonight. And I'd like to first to give a shout out to all the schools and the students for making these lovely appreciation banners and posters. We were putting them up today and just remarking how talented our students are. It's really a privilege to work here and work with our students. I have a couple of things that I pulled out from the mix because I thought they were really cute, so I'll start off with those. For our sports enthusiast, we have a student who said, "Thank you for giving your time for us." And I took the time to draw a basketball, a soccer ball, a baseball, my favorite, and a football. Go Hawks next year. So I know it's over for this year, but next year. Another one is, I think the student has a real future in graphic design because they use graphical elements to express appreciation. So as a communications person, thought maybe I would share that with you. And then my personal favorite, because of the beautiful nail polish on the hands, it says, "Thank you for giving your time for us." And then this one really says it all. It says, "Thank you for all of your hard work, ARE, and helping our schools, for not giving up on us, and for caring about us and our schools." So I thought that was just really heartwarming and inspirational. Melissa asked us in our team meeting this week about reflecting on our leadership skills and everything and why we still do what we do. And I've been here a long time, and I'm very privileged to be here, but my why has grown and expanded, and as I've learned more and become more familiar with education, and I just really appreciate everything that the board does for our students and for our schools. So I recently came across a quote from a famous blues musician, Mr. B.B. King. And he said, "The beautiful thing about learning is that no one can take it away from you," which I thought was really profound. And as we consider the powerful difference our school board members make in building the future of our community, and that future is our children. And tonight we're taking a few minutes to recognize our board members who give their time and energy in supporting the education of our youth. But let's be reminded of this beautiful thing and our core business, which is called learning, and how it impacts our children and their futures. We want to say thank you to our school board members who are entrusted with the responsibility of educating 25,416 students, attending 42 schools and academies spread across 71 square miles, so quite a large district, as we're all aware. And through collaboration as a team and with school district staff, your governance and advocacy are building the future of education by helping us realize the hopes and dreams of our children. And for that, we say thank you. And tonight, please accept these tokens of gratitude as displayed around the room, and for working so hard and making a difference in the lives of so many. And we'd like to present a certificate from the School Board Association Washington Association of School Board Directors. And it says, Building the Future of Public Education, School Board Recognition Month, January 2019, in appreciation of your valuable service to the children of Washington State. And we'd certainly echo that.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Take that away.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to welcome Anita McPherson, who also sits on the Kent Principal Association Executive Board, if you'd like to come and express a few words.
Good evening. I'm here on behalf of the Kent Principals Association. We just wanted to thank you for your service. And really it's to all the students and employees in Kent School District. Building administrators really recognize that what you do takes a great deal of time and commitment. It is all unpaid volunteer work. And leadership is not genetic. So we have all had life experiences that have guided us to these roles. And leading continues to be hard work. Leaders are often challenged no matter what the decision is. And we appreciate your focus on always keeping our students first. So we look forward to continuing our partnership with you. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to welcome Janine Weber, who is the Senior Vice President for the Kent Area Council PTA.
On behalf of the Kent Area PTA Council, I would like to thank the board for your willingness to serve the community in a capacity which we know takes a lot of time and energy, and for which you receive very little reward. Unfortunately, it seems to be the nature of public service work that when you do a good job, you hear nothing, and when things don't go so well, you hear plenty. Maybe that's just human nature. You might say that's a good thing in a way, because it means that people have come to have very high expectations for our public institutions, and especially for our school district in particular. But I'm here tonight to let you know that we do recognize the amount of work that it takes, and we appreciate all that you've done, especially in these difficult times, to get our district back on firm financial footing, while also working to improve your connection and the communication with parents and the community. So in the what have you done for me lately category, we would like to share a couple of things we've noticed lately that we particularly appreciate and want to thank you for. Particularly, we like that you have been seeking wide and diverse participation in your new fiscal recovery task force. Like the task force, and we like how you're trying to give many voices to be on that. We appreciate the quarterly outreach very much that you're doing with your community conversations. We appreciate the improvements in compensation recently that will make it easier to recruit and retain high-quality staff. And we love the new organizational chart, which is organized around strategic goals, and which many businesses do not do. And it shows where everybody fits in, which as parents, we've been wanting to see something like that, because when you're a parent and you're trying to see who you need to talk to and where do they fit, and who works for who, and what section is that, now you can see it, so we love that. So these are just a few of the many positive things, that we've noticed lately that you've been doing, and we know that much remains to be done, but we applaud your efforts, and we appreciate your service. And we also stand ready to partner with you to advance the goals of the district to help all of our children achieve their goals.
Thank you,
Janine.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all. So we will now go to National Mentoring Month proclamation, and I will ask Director Daniels to read the proclamation, please.
Yes. So National Mentoring Month. Whereas the Kent School District recognizes that its success depends on ensuring all students succeed in school and reach their full potential in life, and realizes that students need a solid foundation of support that will help them become well-educated, confident, and productive citizens, and whereas mentoring is a proven effective strategy that helps students by matching them with a caring, responsible adult who can provide guidance and direction and build their confidence, and whereas research shows that mentoring has beneficial and long-term effects for students by increasing their chances of high school graduation and college attendance and decreasing the likelihood of substance abuse and other risky behaviors, and whereas mentoring strengthens our community's economic and social well-being by helping students fulfill their potential while helping maintain healthy families and promoting more vibrant communities, and whereas National Mentoring Month is an opportunity to raise public awareness of the importance of mentoring, recognize the dedicated individuals who serve mentors, and encourage more citizens to help build a bright future for Kent's youth through mentoring. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Kent School District Board of Directors proclaim January 2019 as National Mentoring Month and urge all citizens to recognize the importance of mentoring, to look for opportunities to serve as mentors in their communities.
We'd like to invite Dee Clem from Communities and Schools of Kent and Kendrick Glover from GEM to accept the proclamation, please.
Good evening. Kendrick nominated me to speak, so I'm speaking. But I think I can say on behalf of both GEM and Communities and Schools, we want to thank the school district and the school board, Dr. Watts, President Vangadoslan, board members, Ms. Halley, for your partnership. For the work we do is enhanced and enabled by our partnership with the school district. So we appreciate that. I want to take this opportunity tonight, you mentioned in the proclamation, the individuals that volunteer to do this, because Kendrick and I can run our programs all we want, but it's the volunteers that commit the time to do it. And I know we have some board members that have volunteered their time. We have some staff members here who also have volunteered their times, but I have a very special volunteer here tonight, Miss Melanie Taylor, who quietly sits in the back, because that's how she does her amazing work in the community. She has been a volunteer mentor for us for over 14 years. When I came on to Communities and Schools, she had been matched with a student, and I think you were with that student for 6 or 8 years, weren't you?
The year before she graduated, so I took her over.
Yeah. And they spoke together at one of our fundraising breakfasts, but really special. Melanie works in education with the fire department, so spends a lot of time in the community, but in addition to that, spends her 1 hour a week with a student in the school. So want to thank Melanie and our other 100+ mentors that we have working with students in the school district. And I know Kendrick has a great team that meets with his students in the community, and thanks to the school district for your partnership.
So we have photo opportunities now. Dee and Kendrick, if you would, and Melanie, if you'd be able to wait.
Maybe anybody else who's a mentor?
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Would like to? Yes, anyone else who are mentors would like to join us for a photo opportunity?
No, we do one more for the board recognition.
All right, we are up to 3.01, and we only have one card tonight, so we're hoping no one else has a card with them. We're up to our student discipline quarterly report, and we'll call on Chief School Operations and Academic Support Officer Israel Vela and our Executive Director of Student and Family Support Services, Randy Heath, to present and answer questions.
Thank you, members of the board, President Vengadassalam, Dr. Watts, Ms. Howley. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. Just want to remind you that before our December break, we did not jointly present with our safety report, and wanted to share with you that in our continuous improvement process and working on visual representation, we've been working closely with our organizational effectiveness team in, getting this report in a visual representation and a little easier to understand. So we're continuing to do that. Had a little glitch with some data, so we're excited to come back to you today. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over to Mr. Heath.
All right, President Vengadassalam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Howley. I want to point out that that since we did not have this in December, we actually were able to add December's information to this as well. So it's not quite the quarterly report, it's quarterly plus. And then our next one will only be the next 2 months after that. So. Okay. So our introduction, we're going to provide a trend overview of the exclusionary discipline for the first quarter over the past 3 years, explain transition to the new dashboard that we're using for the discipline report, and update on the multi-tiered systems of support implementation. As Mr. Vela said, we've been working closely with our organizational effectiveness with this new dashboard. We are showing some things in some different ways. We are going to want some input back from you after the presentation as to maybe there's some pieces that you used to get that you didn't quite get, or there are some other pieces that you feel like you need, and then we'll go back and we'll work these. Reminder that these dashboards are primarily being used by schools and other district personnel to really look at systems issues and other things like that. So we use this, we've kind of designed them for those uses, and then we pull that information out for the board reports. And then, so let's take a look. This is our 3-year trend of out-of-school and in-school suspensions over the last 3 years, over the first 4 months of the school year. The gray is the out-of-school, and the blue is the in-school. And you can see that the numbers are down a little bit from last year, about where they were the year before, or the year before that. This is where we were kind of excited about some of the information that is here. It's we want to be very clear when we're looking for disproportionality that we're clear as what the overall demographics of the district are as compared to what we're seeing in our data. The other piece is we used to have a kind of a separate dashboard for the top reasons why students are suspended. We've included that within this same piece right there, so you can see down at the bottom the major, the main reasons why those suspensions are. We've also included in the inclusive ed and ELL students right there on that same dashboard with the different race categories there. As you can see, the overall out-of-school suspension rate, we continue to have disproportionality in our Black African American students and our multiracial to some degree, and definitely in our inclusive education. We wanted to again break it down by levels. As you can see here, the out-of-school suspension rate for elementary. The other thing here is we combined one of the charts that we used to have, which was to break out not only how many incidents there were for that race or for inclusive ed, but also how many students that is. So that would show if a student was suspended more than one time. So for example, when you look at your multiracial, there were 31 incidents, but 17 students. So some of those students had more than one incident. You can see that at the elementary level, our top our top reason for suspension is disruptive behavior, and then the assault of staff and the assault of student. When we look at the middle school here, you can see that we continue to have disproportionality with our Black African American students, not as much with our multiracial that we saw with the elementary. Once again, inclusive education is another place where we are seeing disproportionality. When we move into the secondary school, we start to see that the major reason why students are being suspended are fights. And or assaults. You might see that category down there that says fight/assault. That is actually fight/assault involvement. So that would be they were not actually in the fight or part of the assault. However, they were in some way involved in it, either by inciting it, or possibly being part of it and not leaving the scene when asked to do so, or something to this effect. And then our high school numbers. What's interesting here is when we look at the disproportionality at the high school, a major change in the disproportionality of our Black African American students, where we saw large numbers at the elementary and the middle school. We do not see a great disproportionality, at least through the first 4 months of this year, at the high school level. In that category. We still do see it with our inclusive education students, however. The number one reason, once again, for suspensions at the high school level is your fight, physical aggression there. So one of the nice things with this new dashboard that we're using is we are actually able to easier pull out by full levels. So elementary, middle, high, and then get those disproportionality percentages by a full level, in which we were not able to do really before. And to see which categories specifically at those grade levels are causing those suspensions. Here's a look at our in-school suspension numbers. You'll see that some of the disproportionality still exists at the in-school suspension level. There are more of them. It is a push to try to keep kids into school. Defiance and disruptive behavior are some of our largest categories in doing that in-school suspensions. Observations of the data. One of them is that overall out-of-school suspensions are down through the first 4 months. There was a question earlier that someone had that was around, well, our enrollment's down. Is that the reason why possibly our suspensions are down? That could be a part of it. I did do some old-fashioned math. I went back to my math teacher days and went back and looked at some of the data from our last couple of years. And we're going to work with organizational effectiveness to get this in calculated itself. But so this year, we have, so far for the first 4 months, 1.3% of all students had some sort of out-of-school suspension. The previous year, 1.5% of all students, and the year before that, 1.2%. So we are down a little bit, even when you look at and account for the drop in enrollment. And what's nice when you look at it this way also is, I think sometimes we get lost in the number that although that's a large number of suspensions, it still represents basically that 98.5% of our students are not being suspended. It is just a small number that is. So I think that's important to remember. Overall, in-school suspension rates are up for the first 4 months. Disproportionality continues to exist, especially for our Black African American students and our inclusive education students. And then fighting or assaults tend to be the cause of our largest amount of out-of-school suspensions. You can look at that in a couple ways. Obviously, we don't want violent acts happening in our schools. We don't like assaults or fights. However, if you go back several years ago, the majority of kids were being suspended were for disruptions, defiance, those types of things. And so violence in our schools, drugs in our school, these are the things that I think you see as out-of-school suspensions may be more appropriate for those types of behaviors when those things are happening. So you could look at it a couple different ways. Multi-tiered system support, we want to continue to keep that at the forefront as we move through. Wanted to give you a couple updates on that. We do have 2 district coaches and our contract with Sound Support who have really been going out there and been working with school teams to really address and look at their data around the discipline that we were talking about, the dashboards, the Swiss that we use, and really try to figure out, are there systems issues that are there that we should be addressing, and to try to take care of some of these things. We're really using Swiss, as we said, at the elementary and middle school to do this, and our dashboards are being used at all levels. And then we're continuing on our training around the whole area of behavior. We're doing 3 Swiss trainings in the fall. We have another one scheduled here in January. AIM, which is our Assess, Intervene, Monitor. And the purpose of that training is to really try to figure out what the function of a behavior is that a student is doing, so that when we put in corrective actions, it actually makes sense when we know why the student is doing this behavior. We've already had 3 trainings this fall. We have 3 more scheduled in the next 2 months. Second step is our social emotional curriculum. We've been doing some online training with that. We have an in-person training coming in January for those who learn better that way. And we've done, with the coaching model, what has allowed us to do a lot of different custom workshops specifically for the schools that they're working at. So if there's a specific need at a school, the ones that are up there that I was talking about are ones that are open to district-wide. Anyone can sign up to come in and do that. Whereas the custom workshops, they'll come in and on the in-service days or in the early release days or other things, our coaches are going in and presenting training based on what they've learned from looking at their discipline at their individual buildings and what they've identified as a need, and that's been popular. And then we're just continuing to develop systems to better serve individual students. We've collaborated with Inclusive Ed Education Department this last fall to develop a process that schools can use when they are starting to encounter difficulty with a student around a problem behavior. And this is more a specific student. And so we are trying to work out a similar process that you would use whether it was an inclusive education student or a general education student. Before, we've kind of had separate processes. We haven't, it's like, oh, a special education student, you need to then work with, inclusive education department. Well, we want to make it as there are certain things that can't be the same because there are some laws that are around that, but there are other pieces that really can be the same, and we want to make sure that we're coordinating that whenever we can so that the schools understand kind of the process that we want to use in these systems to make sure that we're getting the support out where it needs to go. So we're excited about that collaboration. Any questions?
I do so, and you probably know the question I'm going to ask, because I ask it every time. I'm hoping I'll get an answer at some point. What are we doing as we notice, right, the disproportionality? So what are we doing to address the adult part, the adult involvement in that with training? I still don't see anything around anti-bias or implicit bias, and I know that that is a contributing factor to some of these issues. So what are we doing about that? I see all the training, but I see nothing about that. And so I'm wondering when that becomes a part of the training.
I believe that's part of the individual coaching model, really, is to understand, like what I talked about, the custom training. When a school is able to look at their data, because you see overall disproportionality of a district possibly like at a level, it does not mean that same level of disproportionality happens at every one of our elementary schools. It means when we add the data together, that's what they come at. So it is really, what we are trying to do is really work with schools to deeply analyze their data. And if at their school they find that they have a large disproportionality around their discipline, and it's a trend that has gone on not just for the first 4 months of this school year, but that they've seen over time, that indicates that there is a greater level of training around certain things that they may need to look at as a building. And then those coaches are able to try to work with them to figure out what that training would look like? And that is why we really have felt like this coaching model is so important, because in a district our size, the schools are very different. An elementary school on this side of the district has very different needs than the elementary school on that side of the district. And so it really takes looking at your individual data to try to make those determinations.
So I'm going to disagree with you. I think it should be a district-wide professional development. But what I would like to see then is I would like to see the disproportionality broken down by school.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Denise. I think implicit bias needs to be district-wide. And if it's not at this point in time, and there's that school that their disproportionality is larger, how likely are they to say, oh, it's probably our implicit bias, and let's go with that? I mean, isn't that something that people sort of push away from? I want to know how strong.
Well, that comes with a lot of individual conversations from different district leaders. We have a group of executive directors of learning improvement that work extremely closely with their principals and looking at their data on a regular basis. And I know that our ed leads are having those conversations with their building leaders and looking at their data together with them. And so that is a function of that role, really. So.
Okay. Also, going back to the defiance, definition of defiance or disruptive behavior, I know we've talked about this in the past.
Right.
Do we have a clear definition of what that is so that people can check off the box, or are people saying, well, this is defiance, whereas in another school that wouldn't be defiance? Or another teacher, maybe even in the same school, it wouldn't be defiance or disruptive behavior.
Right. You'll realize that, and if you'll remember, for the last 2 years, we've come with changes to our procedures around discipline that our district-wide discipline committee has done. And we have the last 2 years focused on those two categories. Remember, 3 years ago, they weren't defined. We put a definition in, last year. We made adjustments to it. The committee did this last time. So we will continue to make adjustments to try to make it as clear as possible. But then you also always have individuals then interpreting that, and they can be interpreted in different ways. But that has been a focus.
Also on the Swiss and AIM trainings, who's participating? How do we? Is it so? I may have been writing down my question as you were addressing it, because I looked up and I went, oh, I think you just said.
Yeah.
But.
Like I said, at this point, we've created those classes and we've opened them up. We've made suggestions to we have administrators in there. We have people serving in like counselor, behavior interventionist type roles that have come. I think that's been our main one. I believe I'm not sure how many teachers have actually come to that if they're not in one of those other roles. But we can I can then go back and try to see if we can't pull some of that data out and give you that as to whether it's elementary, secondary, that.
Okay, and then just the last question about second step. You said there's another training this month, I think you said. Who is that for? Is that for people who haven't had training in it yet, new teachers?
Second Step actually comes with a lot of great online tutorial. It's a very easy curriculum to use, and there's training that's available online. Most of the people who are teaching it find that that is all they've needed in order to do that. But what we have heard from some people is they like the in-person training that they can actually ask questions and talk to other people about as they're doing. And so we listened to what they were saying and said, okay, well, let's in addition to all the online resources that are there, let's put this class together and see if we have people sign up, and then if there's a need, we will continue to have. That's one of the nice things about having this coaching roles here, is that we're able to offer more of these trainings. And as people have said, we want this, we're able to work with our professional development department to do that.
Thank you, Randy.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I have, because looking at the two, I think that I want to see these numbers a little bit down farther, because if I do a rough look at out-of-school suspensions overall, in-school suspensions overall, the disparity by ethnicity appears greater in the out-of-school suspensions versus in-school, suggesting there's also a disparity in the choice of delivering an in-school versus out-of-school discipline, and potentially understanding both how that disparity exists, but then also understanding, if we can, kind of like what does that mean to our overall discipline level? Does it mean that there are certain groups that are being disciplined more than they should, or groups that are being disciplined less than they should, and thus our overall discipline rate would go up if applied standard, regardless of school, regardless of race, thus suggesting an additional overall change in how discipline is applied. And so I think that, I don't know if it's the board or if your team can come up with it, I want to see the metrics a different way. I want to be able to answer that question. Is there a disparity overall in how discipline is applied in school versus out of school? Is it under-applied? Is it over-applied by certain groups? And kind of get to the understanding of where we need to go, as opposed to attacking a certain number or something like that.
Right.
By school would be important too.
By school would be important, because it also helps understand something beyond ethnicity, more of like how the environment of discipline happens in that school.
Yeah, so a couple of mine have already been asked and answered. So the definitions were one that I had, and then also the cultural bias training, what we're doing on that as a district-wide level. So I was wondering, I think in the past we've seen what the year before was as compared to this year, and I appreciate the new format. I like how it is, but I was left wondering, okay, how does this differ from the year before? Are there areas we're seeing improvement, areas that we're not? So that would be helpful for me. And then I was wondering why on the in-school suspension, it wasn't broken out also by elementary and middle school and high school.
Right. We're, especially as we move to a new format, we're always trying to figure out what's too much, what's too little, where's that perfect sweet spot right there. And so I know that we've really been focused on out-of-school suspension, so we thought we'd figure that out. The idea of the 3-year, I've talked to the team over there that has put together the dashboard, and we're looking at how that might look and still be in a visually pleasing way that you can kind of see it all. As you start layering on more and more years, it becomes harder to sometimes interpret that data, because the demographics of the district at the time change at that time too. So it's kind of like multi-layers up there. But we're going to look at that. Absolutely.
Because when I look at out-of-school suspensions, it looks as we go, into high school, the numbers don't seem as far disproportionate. I mean, there still are. So then is that because we put more emphasis on high school and training on that, and we haven't done as much in the elementary? Or just, trying to figure out what is the why that we're seeing those numbers?
Right.
So.
All right. So I'd like to see the data also split. I think I mentioned this last time, by the MTSS tier. So where does it fall in the tier? I don't know if that's possible, because we have community-based organizations focusing on certain tiers, and it would be good to understand how effective those contracts are, in helping with this.
I guess I'm not quite understanding what you're asking for, as terms of, we don't label kids as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
No. Just in the out of school suspensions, what is there must be some services being provided, right? So where do they fall under, for those services in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? I'm imagining that there are services being provided by our CBOs.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how we would because like students are not, that's not necessarily connected to a student in Skyward that would then be able to be pulled out of her. Let us talk about it, and let us see what we might be able to do in respect to that.
I'm particularly interested in the, actually the in-school suspension, because I know in years past we've talked about how there hasn't been a consistent programming that's happening in our schools for in-house, in-school suspension. And so I would be interested in seeing if there's a movement to standardize that. What exactly are we doing in the elementary schools? So I am interested also in breaking it down from elementary, middle, and high school. And I would think at that point that MTSS would come in, or at least the service providers would be coming in at some point. So if not, that's okay, but I'd be interested in that performance measurement of that MTSS model as it relates to the service provider under those models. And then I would also like to see, we talk about fights, and but we used to differentiate against educators and versus students, or are we still
And we do.
splitting?
Yeah, you'll see assault of staff and assault of student.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the only one that's not broke out that way is the inciting a fight or assault. And so the inciting or fight involvement doesn't usually, I mean, that's usually students. Yeah.
Okay, I missed that. Thank you. And then, yes, having the schools. I know in the past we have had it separated by schools, including the officers' report, so safety reports.
Right.
So I'd like to see that also here.
Okay.
So that's all I have.
Perfect.
Anybody else?
I will share very quickly. So, Randy, thank you for presentation to our board. I appreciate the line of questioning, and it gets to the heart of the matter. How are we supporting the needs of our students as well as the adults? What I'd like to propose is working with staff for us to get closer to some of the questions that may not be answered today on the dais, that we get a clear picture of what is current state at each one of our schools. So current state regarding our race and equity policy implementation, current state of what is occurring in each one of our schools in terms of best we know practice or current practice, culture climate conversations. I know that I enjoyed initially conversations with our executive director of learning improvement, who have a keen understanding and oversight of what is taking place within our schools instructionally, operationally, and with regard to community leadership. So I look forward to bringing some additional information, perhaps a little more clarity, that give us a better understanding of where we are. Okay? All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Randy. And we are now up to 3.02 Board Communication Plan Review. And I'd like to call on Ms. Melissa Laramie, Director of Communications and Public Affairs, to present and answer questions.
Thank you, President Venkatachalam, members of the board, Dr. Watson, Ms. Halley. I am pleased to be with you here this evening and present the second review of the board superintendent governance team communication plan for the 2018-19 school year. The purpose of the communications plan, your communications plan is to present a clear and concise framework for communicating with our school community. So as we've worked together this last 5 months through the work sessions, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the development of the first ever KSD board communications plan. And I also appreciate the opportunity to for others outside of the communications and public affairs team to see just how complicated this work is. So it's not just about school communications is more than photos and Facebook
and websites and flyers, but your communication goals and what you put forth over the summer and worked on together to develop as a team, as a board superintendent's governance team, really is about the tools and systems you use to communicate publicly, your internal communications, and to communicate effectively with us as KSD staff members. The plan that we developed together contains 4 main components, including identifying your audiences, the strategies that we're using, the specific methods of communication, and the assessment and accountability pieces that we're using to evaluate the plan as we go, which includes this review here this evening. So as we approach the end of the first semester of this school year, and I would like to take a look back at the board communication accomplishments for this year. So as I stated, it is the first strategic communications plan, and it is aligned with our district communications plan. So we made sure that everything that you're doing is aligned to what we're doing as a district. And each month at our communication work sessions, we review the data of everything that we're doing aligned to your communications plan. And that includes your board e-newsletters. So we began those in September, and this shows the average open rates, click-through rates, and the total number of unsubscriptions. Remember that your board newsletters are sent out to over 19,000 KSD community members each month, and over 4,000 team KSD members each month. And that includes staff, temporary employees, contracted employees. This year, we also continued your board community conversations in the community, which are effective ways for that one-on-one or two-on-many conversations for you to go out in pairs. We kicked them off in October with the first 3 and are continuing them, of course, this year throughout the rest of the year. Additionally, to broaden access and awareness, we began posting all board meetings and work sessions on our KSD social media platforms to make sure people were aware of the opportunities to attend in person and view on live stream all of our work sessions and regular board meetings. We continue the BSGT team's learning and staff's learning of OPMA. We had a training session, a refresher course, if you will, on the OPMA and a Q&A opportunity during the November 7th session, during the work session. And as part of the communications plan, the low cost, actually no cost option for live streaming was approved so that all work sessions and regular board meetings would be live streamed for all to access. The viewing data for the board work sessions and regular sessions is here. So the average board meeting views is 218 viewers, and work sessions are viewed on average by 90 viewers. And of course, as part of the communications plan, we are staying committed to being both data informed and looking at all information and considering each decision about the communications plan through an equity lens. So looking ahead, as we did this evening, we have a number of things still left to do with our communications plan this year. Moving forward, there are 6 immediately upcoming opportunities for board members to engage with staff and community. So 3 this month, and 3 in February and in March. Those locations we're still working on for February and March. I know Director DeBuehler made a great suggestion earlier this evening about perhaps a senior community center could be, or excuse me, a senior center could be one location for the community conversation, perhaps, but maybe looking at some different various locations for the next series of community conversations. We've been talking at length about an online solution for a public forum for discussions. And we spoke earlier this evening about the winter break, and we're still working with our IT partners to look at different solutions of what that could look like and what that could be, and that's forthcoming. As part of your goal to inform the public of the board's roles and responsibilities, we have a couple videos coming up that we'll be working with you. We're excited to work with you on those 2 videos, so those are coming up. And of course, at each meeting, we'll continue to review data and continue to look at everything we do through our equity lens. We began talking about some changes and tweaks that we could make to our communications plan earlier this evening. So I look forward to continuing that conversation at our next work session on February 6th. With that, that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
We'll start this way.
I don't have any. We had, between this and our work session earlier tonight, my question's been answered. Thank you.
Same as well. My question's been answered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Melissa and team. There's been quite a bit of changes, additions, last-minute transmissions. So thank you for bearing with us, and we'll get our act together as well on our own. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we will now move into 4.0 Board of Directors discussions and approval. And we will begin with 4.01 Microsoft Professional Development Funding. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion.
So I move that we approve the acceptance of the grant money from Microsoft.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, a motion has been made and passed or seconded to approve Microsoft Professional Development Funding. Are there any discussions or questions, please?
I want to bring it up because this was the concern of mine from last week. That was part of the gift acceptance. On the consent agenda, didn't have enough information. So the information that has been provided that I've been able to review since that meeting has been sufficient enough to get me comfortable. I said I wasn't comfortable before. I am comfortable now. So I have no further questions. But thank you for the information that's been provided.
I do have a comment. One of the things earlier, we listened to a stay report, stay interviews and a report. I did want to say that we received also an email from a staff member about approving this. I do think one of the things that came out from that stay interview that caught my attention was that we do need to improve PD opportunities, and also that we shouldn't be making decisions enforcing staff members to use certain products and not necessarily get feedback. So I just wanted to bring up, I think anytime we do stop or we somehow impact staff members' performance with our decisions, I do think it needs to be brought up by either staff or by the board, asking the question, how does this impact those particular staff members? So I just wanted to bring that up because I don't think our intent by asking questions is to prevent them from moving forward in what they need to do. So that's really important, and so I'm hoping at least one of us will bring up that.
And I apologize because our instructional technology team actually worked to get the questions and information you needed to feel comfortable with this. And they provided lots of supplemental documentation about the trainings that were offered previously, the services that this grant could provide. And some of them were actually comments from exit surveys from teachers who'd attended previous sessions in previous school years. And I opted to not include that in the supplemental information because I just felt that it was so much information already added there, but I can make sure you receive that as, it's not speaking to the perspectives of what will happen, but it will speak to their kind of feedback from what happened before. And so I can make sure
Well,
that gets in your hands too.
just an understanding for us, delaying the response or the acceptance, how does that impact those individuals? So we just want to be cognizant of that. So, all right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, then I will call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say no. All right, motion passes. 4.02, storage warehouse at Kent School District bid acceptance and award of contract. I'd like to ask for a motion on 4.02.
I move that we approve to accept all bids for the storage warehouse at Kent School District project and approve the award contract to Micro Z Technology Company in the amount of $2,395,000 plus Washington State tax and additional funding of $1.6 million.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. A motion has been made to approve 4.02 storage warehouse at Kent School District bid acceptance and award of contract. Are there any discussions or questions?
Yeah. I have the SCR Architects estimate was 1.25 million, and that's way off from the lowest bid. How could their estimate be so low, or why is their estimate so much lower than the actual bid?
Well, part of the issue is it's hard to anticipate where we're going with cost escalation in the climate that we're in right now with all the construction that's going on. And there were some things added by the city later that they didn't get their estimate updated before we went to a bid. And unfortunately, sometimes the estimators miss it. I know that's not an answer. We will work with them. This is the first project they've done for us, so we will work with them and their estimators on how we can tighten up their estimates in the future when they do future projects for us.
Okay. And what's going to be stored in this warehouse?
Well, right now, the warehouse is overloaded that we have right now. Maintenance doesn't have any storage. Our custodian has no storage there. There's a lot of things that are stored in the warehouse that are long-term archival type storage. And so what we've been wanting to do this for a number of years, but we finally got it on the bond issue. It's basically to expand the warehouse capacity. And then we're also putting in a small workshop for the central kitchen to work on equipment that they use, because they have to do it now in the central kitchen, and it's not really conducive to food. So we're creating a small work area for them too.
Thanks, Fred.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Hearing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. Okay, motion passes. 4.03, change order approval, Suze Creek Elementary Multipurpose Room Addition Rebid Project. I'd like to ask.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I move that we approve change order number 1 for Suze Creek Elementary Multipurpose Room Addition Rebid Project.
All right, is there a second, please?
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve change order approval, Suze Creek Elementary Multipurpose Room Addition Rebid Project. Are there any discussions or questions? All right, hearing none, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. Motion passes. 4.04, authorization to charge convenience fees for online payments. I'd like to ask for a board member to make a motion.
I move that we approve the implementation of per transaction online credit card convenience fee of $1 per transaction.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made to approve the authorization to charge convenience fees for online payments. Are there any discussions or questions?
I have a couple of questions,
And
actually.
I have several as well, so please go ahead.
So I'm wondering, so do we have an idea of how much we've spent or how much this has cost the district outside of the fees? So how much would the credit card charges have cost
Yes.
the district?
Yes, and I think they're down at the very bottom of the agenda item, the last item, approximate that. So I had my staff go and try to estimate in round terms. We think that the total cost that we incur per transaction, just based on like the last 3 years or something, is a little more than $2 per transaction. Keep in mind that's a sliding scale, right? So that can be for very larger transactions as well as just buying a T-shirt, right? But all in, it comes into slightly more, about $2. I think it was $2.02. So that comes in, in the range of $20,000 to $25,000 per year, depending on which year we're looking at and the number of transactions that essentially the district's been subsidizing. The dollar flat fee aspect, we estimate about $10,000. So the purpose isn't to cover all of it. The purpose really is to kind of come into conformance to what is an emerging best practice here, which is that school districts, as stewards of public funds, are not absorbing all of that fee, which is essentially a convenience fee, and that families that want to make these payments at schools can do so without a fee, and it essentially kind of splits the burden of that transaction.
So, well, I would think though, because you can do cards at schools as well. So with that transaction
Correct.
fee would
And
be
you
for
wouldn't
at
pay-
schools or both.
So you would not pay for this flat fee when you slide the card at the school.
Oh, it's just online.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's designed specifically so as to not, we want this to really be a focus on the convenience aspect. If that's a burden for a family, if that dollar, we want to provide them a mechanism to be able to do that without the fee. So it's focused on the online payments.
Okay, so I'm just thinking, so if a family's they're doing lunch money now and they do a $20 deposit, it's going to be $21 with the convenience fee.
Yes, so I actually, it's all transactions other than lunch fees.
Okay.
So the lunch fees are on a separate system. So we're talking about most of the payments that occur in a school setting, ranging from, it can be an activity fee, an ASB fee, yes, a whole slew of things.
Okay. Okay.
So, and more to your point, like we did an informal survey of kind of, districts in the area, and the majority of districts kind of that are our peers are doing something. Some of them are doing a sliding scale, some of them are doing a flat fee. The rationale behind a flat fee is that you're providing a little incentive for people to do 3 or 4 transactions at once rather than doing each individual one, which benefits the district in the sense that you're not incurring as many fees.
And just one really quick clarification as I think about this, and I know I've done this with my kids, but I don't remember. So if you're online and you're doing like you're ordering, you're paying a science fee and you're paying all of those things and you've got
Right.
multiple students, you can do it in one transaction.
Okay, so now so in the future, yes, because we're implementing this new system, which you approved at the board meeting, I think in November, called the InTouch receiving point of sale system, which will now allow that. And in previous iterations, people have been forced to do those transactions separately.
Okay.
So we hope will have the effect of actually increasing the number of transactions. So our estimates from prior years, it should make it a lot easier to pay online, and that's really what people want to do.
Okay.
And they more or less are willing to pay that dollar for the convenience of not having to drive to the school.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any. Did you have
You answered most of mine. I just wanted to clarify one point. You said it, I just want to clarify. If someone has an outstanding lunch balance and they go online to pay that, this would not cover those set of transactions. They would just pay whatever the outstanding lunch amount
Yes,
is.
so the lunch fees are paid through a separate portal. This question is being called because of our implementation of the new InTouch receipting. Question for the future is the merging of those systems, which is possible, but we're not biting that entire cookie off in the first implementation. So this is just as it relates to phasing out our keystroke system and phasing in InTouch.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
So I had one quick question.
Sure.
Sorry. Is how is it going to be communicated? Is it just going to be?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I imagine that people, if you go on and you see it in one place, people may ask about the lunch menu as well. So
Yes.
just wondering.
Yeah, actually, we have a couple of things to communicate here, and this is coming in concert with the implementation of the system. So, like maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, a notice is going out to schools to say, kind of, here's what's going on. We're going to explain both what their staff need to understand about the training of the new system, as well as explain what's happening here with the fee. I honestly, I just don't think that most people are going to be shocked by this because almost every other school district does something. I just think this is something that hasn't come up in because we haven't used InTouch in the past. And so it kind of naturally called the question, but we're very much kind of in the middle of road of what districts are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. So I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand. Aye. All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. Okay, motion passes. We're up to 4.05, technology levy purchase. And I'd like to ask for a motion to approve 4.05.
I move that the board approve the purchase of computer bundles from Microcomputer Systems, Inc., using tech levy funds in the amount of approximately $2.5 million.
All right, is there a second?
A second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve technology levy purchase. Are there any discussions or questions?
Reiterate, this was from before. Didn't have really information. I know we kind of talked about this. Read all through this before. It provides, in my mind, the information that we were looking for, and specifically in terms of approving something that wouldn't normally come across us in the other policies that we have, so that catch-all policy, so that it has, my questions have been sufficiently answered from before, and I have no new questions.
So I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. All right, motion passes. We're up to 5.0 consent agenda. And is there any item that you would like pulled for discussion? 5.0. No kidding. No one. All right.
I thought I had one, but I can't remember what it was.
Yes, Karen?
I
You
thought it was
do?
travel, but I
think it's probably the sex expendable.
This is the first.
might be, yeah.
All right. So I would like to ask a board member to make a motion to approve the consent agenda, please.
I move that we approve tonight's consent agenda.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion has been made to approve consent agenda. Are there any questions or discussions? No. All those in favor, say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say no and raise your right hand. The motion passes. We are up to 6.01, informational and procedure 6213P, travel authorization and expense reimbursement. Any questions or comments?
I have a question, actually. Yes.
All right.
So I was looking through this, and I was thinking about, in particular, the meal purchase. So it looks as though staff will have to, if they are somewhere where they need to purchase meal, they'll have to do it via meal reimbursement as opposed to being able to either get the funds up front or use a district card for that. And I just wonder about the ability of, well, I've taken classified staff paras to professional development and really not having the means to eat out for a certain number of days, or what does that look like, and how are we supporting those staff?
So there are travel cards that are available, and we're not taking away the ability to receive a travel card.
No, but not for food, according to this, it said not
So-
for food purchase.
So
It said that the meals have to be reimbursed.
So if they're spending out of pocket, they can still request a travel card for
Well,
expenditures.
okay, it says specifically on here 4.2 that it's not for food purchase.
Can you tell us the page you're looking at there?
I am 4.2, page 5 of 5.
Did you say 4.2?
Sorry. It's in the
Page
one with
5
the
of
track
5, get
changes.
to it. It might not be 5 of 5 anymore. I was looking at the one that was marked up.
It's
Is it?
4.2,
Okay.
and it's underlined, no meals or incidental expenses are to be charged to the card.
And Director Daniels, if we are not able to find the answer right now, we can get that to you.
Right, I was gonna say, we can actually take a look at that and make a change there. I think that there is a consideration of fairness. The goal in making the purpose of making that change was previous practice in this district was to cut a check for the per diem rates and all of that spending before staff ever left for a trip. And I understand the cost considerations of that, but we also weren't considering things like what meals were provided with, if it was conference attendance and other things. It was a flat rate cut of you're gone for 3 days, there's 3 meals, here's the federal per diem rates, and that's how it was applied. Absolutely. And so the intent of this was not to put undue burden on staff, it was to balance that pre-reimbursement with being fiscally responsible when we consider travel and what that looks like. So we can take a look at that piece to come up with a happy medium and provide an update on that.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, Russ, no. I did want to bring up one thing. It's not any changes to the procedure, but just a conversation on, I don't know if it's being had in the district. The board members have traditionally, when they have gone on trips, put out a report of what happens. So is there a repository of whatever information or knowledge is gained? We don't want that to go away when the people go, if they go away. So I want to make sure that if we are approving these travel, that we do have a repository of information getting gathered.
I think, sure, as I said, I think we can.
Thank you.
Every time.
Actually, in a couple of our contracts, for instance, the principal's contract specifically states that they're expected to bring back that knowledge, and it outlines how to do that. As we look at different communities, I know that we're building a system in which we have a SharePoint site where we're sharing that information, a PD site. So I think each community is looking for ways that they can bring back that knowledge so that it's available to everyone else. But sometimes it's contractual, sometimes it'll be procedural. Okay.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So that's an informational, and the board doesn't vote on it. So we will move on to our communication and communication from the audience. And at this time, I only have one card from, I don't want to mispronounce, Mr. or Mrs. Montgomery. And it's only one card. So please.
My name is Levine Montgomery, 29327 120th Avenue Southeast, Auburn, Washington. My 11-year-old grandson is a student at Springbrook Elementary School and is enrolled in the special education program. On December 14th, the principal at Springbrook Elementary School made the decision to lock my grandson outside of the school building unsupervised. By her own admission, the principal announced over the intercom for staff and students to not let him in the building even if he knocked. I have reviewed the video footage myself from that day, and my grandson was indeed locked outside without any supervision. He walked around the building and tried to open several doors, but all the doors were locked. He saw students going into a classroom after their recess and tried to re-enter through that door with them, but was told by the recess teacher that the principal said not to let him in. That teacher blocked him in the corner of the entrance, allowed the other students to come in, then ushered him back outside alone, closed the door, and locked the door on him. My grandson also tried to enter the main entrance where the principal and staff were there, and they did not open the door for him. Parents and other children were allowed in and out, but the door was closed and locked so that he could not enter. He went to the classroom door that he had originally exited from and knocked on the window, asking the teacher to open the door, and she closed the blinds in his face and did not open the door. A student eventually opened the door to let him in. The assistant principal notified me and my daughter by phone that my grandson had gone outside and that his daycare was picking him up. I asked to speak with him and was told he was outside and she didn't have a cordless phone. Not once were me nor his mother informed that he had been locked outside of the building by the principal and not allowed to call his mother, and the incident referral report excluded that very important detail. We found out once he went home and told his mother. The principal admitted to us that she locked him out in a meeting that we had with her on December 17th. The decision this principal made to intentionally lock my grandson outside of the school building clearly was child endangerment, pure negligence, and it put him in imminent danger. Since the special education teacher left last year from Springbrook Elementary, they have not had a special education program nor a teacher this year. And these children are being neglected and not receiving the services or supervision that they are entitled to and that is required by law. My grandson was locked outside of his school and was treated like a dog with rabies, and this is completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. How would you feel if that was your child?
Thank you. We will now move to our legislative update with Director Hardy, please.
Yes, well, a lot to start. So this is probably the start of a lot of talking in the legislative update section, because this coming Monday, January 14th, the legislative session for the state begins. It's a regular session, meaning it is longer than last year. It runs through April 28th. The goal in a regular session or a long session one of the goals basically is to approve a new biannual 19 through 21 budget. So where we stand before we all start, both OSPI and the governor have put out their budget requests or their proposed budgets. So these are the things that they want. Obviously, OSPI focused more, but the governor has his overall budget that they want the legislators to put through. And then both the Senate Ways and Means Committee and the House Appropriations Committee have already had meetings in November, December prior to the start of the regular session. If you want to look for it, the Senate Ways and Means Committee has issued a Citizen's Guide to K-12 Finance for the state, but relevant to the district if you're looking for how they're approaching funding as the normal legislative process works. Both the Senate and the House will put together their versions of the budget and do all the things that they do to hopefully come one with an approved budget by the end. No promises, as we've gone into extended sessions before. Two highlights here, both in what the governor did in his prepared speech and many representatives have said in theirs. They believe that the last year's bills met the state need to fund the entire McCleary decision, and they believe basic education is fully funded. Though they have other things that they want, especially around inclusive special education and around capital budget for schools. They think that basic education is fully funded under the current law, and thus there are a lot of other things that they're pushing forward. However, there are a lot of new legislators, both Senate and House, several in our area, but across the state. So they're actually working on figuring out how to put people in various committees, and as they seat basically a new House and Senate as we go forward. That starts Monday, so reach out to them if you know them. We'll be reaching out. We have a couple weeks, more like a month, as we lead up to our Day on the Hill, February 11th. Joining other school board directors down in Olympia to meet with representatives, to talk about what's important to us, talk about what our priorities are, and then you'll hear more from me I get updates on a weekly basis, and so I'll try to pull them together as necessary, provide them to you as in terms of what bills are going forward, what bills are not going forward, and as we end towards a final budget. And so you have, whether you're interested in or not, you have a lot more to hear from me. All of the most all the committee meetings and floor meetings are televised, so you can follow along there as well. So looking forward to that, at least I am. And so that's all for this week, my legislative update.
All right, thank you. Dr. Watts, report, please.
Thank you, President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Ms. Howley, community, staff, family, friends. This, first of all, our first board meeting of 2019. Once again, Happy New Year to everyone. 2019 is and shall be our best year ever until the next year, and the responsibility is on each one of us for that to happen, and it doesn't happen alone. So we appreciate your support in advance. This week marks, in my opinion, one of the most exciting weeks because of the focus of core business. And I can tell you that starting with Friday, so I'll work backwards because today is just the cherry on top. Friday, we have staff who will be meeting with our men on the move, our young men and soon to be, in my understanding, is young men and young women of color who are enrolled in Kent School District, who are here to become better leaders, better students, better citizens, and doing so from the what I would call the examples of leadership from the adults who are serving. So we'll have individuals sharing their leadership story with our young men on the move on Friday. On Thursday, we have an opportunity, staff member, Chief School Operations and Academic Support Officer, Israel Vela, and I will have the opportunity to continue ongoing dialogue with one of our special and unique programs at iGrad. And so we have legislative officials as well as President McCarthy of Renton Technical College who will be there to review, to preview, to observe, to listen and ask questions, to find out more about how we are serving the needs of our iGrad students. We look forward to being a part of that opportunity to learn more, to share information, and to help us as we continue to support our iGrad program. Today was an incredibly special day. Why? Because it was an example of what is supposed to happen. So vision. There's a quote that says leadership is turning vision into reality. And what took place today, we've talked a great deal, and today we saw action of what our instructional framework is supposed to look like. So when we are all working together to plan, to do, to study, and to act, a cycle of continuous improvement that happens through continuous review of data, and not just data for data's sake, but data for information that helps us understand, A, how are our students performing? Are they performing well? Or are they presently struggling? And if so, how do we know? And when we know exactly what examples of interventions or strategies are we using to make sure that we address their specific needs, individual needs, that's equity at its finest in our classrooms. And we saw it with two schools today, several who I know are implementing this strategy and framework at higher levels. Specifically at Ridgewood Elementary School with Principal Cynthia Green and Scenic Hill Elementary School, Principal Harjeet Fuller, we observed classroom instruction with this framework of Plan, Do, Study, Act in a second grade classroom and a third grade classroom, and saw high levels of instructional leadership through questioning, through student reflection, through adult reflection on their own practice. And these individuals truly understood where their students were performing. And the adults took full responsibility for the students' performance. And the next step is for students to begin taking responsibility for their own performance. This is exactly how instructional leadership is supposed to work. And I want to thank several people. It doesn't happen by accident, certainly to our board, for certainly for continuing to press and ask, where are we in this process of having an instructional framework that will move towards an instructional model? It's here. I want to thank our community of teaching and learning and Donnell West and team for continuing to press and provide exemplars and examples of principals who are ready to step forward and showcase this work. I want to thank our school operations academic support and our human resources community for providing professional development, and 3 individuals who are sitting in this room, our executive directors for learning improvement, who are responsible largely for supporting, providing oversight, management, and leading our principals. And they have an incredibly important and incredibly challenging role of getting the most out of our most important school-based leaders outside of the teacher. The principal provides the second most impactful influence on student learning. We saw that today, and I look forward to seeing that again with, I'll say this, with fidelity across the organization. We saw it today in 2 schools, and that's good. That's not where we know we need to be. I want to thank you for your continued support. Thank everyone else who has provided that support going forward. And that concludes my report on our core business of teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. I did want to ask, I think it's on our calendar, but it'd be important to have that instructional model presented at the board meeting.
You know, it's
coming up, right?
We've already had it at a retreat, and you know it's it's ready for prime time. We're getting
Right.
closer than we've ever been. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Well, I just want to say Happy New Year. It's wonderful to see all of you. I hope you were able to disconnect and refresh. I know I was. I disconnected for a good stretch of at least 11 days or so. So got to spend time with family, and it was wonderful. I was thinking, and I'm kind of giggling because this is actually, so I remember I was sworn in on the December 13th meeting of 2017. And so this first meeting would have been the first board meeting I had. And it was School Board Appreciation Month. And I was like, man, this is going to be a breeze. And then we had the year. So anyway, I was just reflecting on my thoughts at that time. But it has been wonderful being here. So I feel still totally honored to have been selected to serve this district and our community. So I just want to thank you for that again. And I really don't have a lot to say because I didn't do a lot, but I'm looking forward to working together and making things better for our students and moving forward. So thanks for being here tonight.
Well, I did one classroom visit, I guess you call it. I was at Mrs. Boyd's second grade classroom at Springbrook Elementary for their read-in on December 18th. I think I saw your name on the roster too. And I took the same books that I took last year to read to 4th graders. They're Chris Van Allsburg books. If you're a teacher, you know who Chris Van Allsburg is, our elementary school teacher. Very clever writer. And I read these same books to 4th graders last year, and I read to the 2nd grade class, and this one girl in the first row nailed what was going on in the book immediately, and I was so impressed. And the kids were asking questions as we went through the story, and they were making comments about it, and they were so astute, so much more astute than the 4th graders were last year. But I don't know, what that's attributed to. But I was just, and I told them that. I said, "You guys are really smart," and so they were feeling pretty good. I was talking to Dr. Behringer right before the meeting. Graduated from Washington State University, and because I did, I get I don't know how often they send it, but it's a beautiful magazine about things that are going on at Washington State University. And I opened the first couple pages, and their full-page ad is a Kent Meridian graduate, Jordan Frost, who was here when I was on the board earlier. So he was, and Dr. Behringer was reminding me, he was student body president at KM, and he was student body president at Washington State University, first African-American student body president, and he is now on the Board of Regents. And he is also in education. So I don't know if we can get him back here in whatever capacity, but I was just so impressed. It was so nice to see his face again. The other thing is I have a shout out for teaching and learning, specifically Dr. Danelle West. Somebody from her team said that it is just incredible how focused she is and how directed, that everything they do goes in the same direction and there's no side steps. It's all going in the same direction and the people are feeling happy and productive. And I just wanted to make sure that, Danelle, you heard that. Yes. And just a reminder, Communities in Schools fundraising breakfast is coming up in March 21st. It's a nonprofit organization, works in conjunction with us, mentoring, wraparound services for our students. A lot of the kids that are in need are serviced by Communities in Schools. So if you can plan on making it to the breakfast, I would appreciate that. Thanks.
As I recall, because right before the break, I went to Springbrook Reading as well, and that's my community school, so I'm there a lot. And well, I had the intention of reading a book to the 4th grade class for about an hour. We got about 10 minutes in, and it mainly turned into a question-and-answer session about why you should go to college in 4th grade. That's what they were thinking about, is why you should go to college. So we had a good time. We had a good talk. And so, and it was very kind of good segue into break. And I would say I know that there was a lot of community resources available to our students and our families over the break. And I saw it out there both when it was just, not having time, or more recently when people had struggles without power, without heat, as we had to make sure that our schools were safe before we welcome kids back in. And so I got to be a part of that as a community member, and so that always helps me understand our role as board directors versus our role as community members and just being out there to help with our community. But looking forward to our role as board directors is the community conversations. Mine especially, not necessarily coming and talking to me, but coming and talking about changes you want in the legislative session. So the next community conversations that we have will be right before we go down to talk one-on-one with our legislators and tell them what's important to us, tell them what they did right last year, tell them what they did wrong last year, or for the new ones, introduce what we want them to do and what we think is important. And so I want to know what you think is important. If you think that this is wrong or this is right and we need to do more, let's just hear it, and then I'll bring it down for you and we'll see where it goes. So that was my report for this meeting.
I just want to welcome everybody back. I'm excited about the new changes to the website. I have an opportunity to look through that. So if you haven't looked at our new KSD website, please take a look. It's got lots of the information laid out very clearly for everyone to see. And I also just, as always, thank you for all that you do. I know that being here, especially for a lot of our staff, is an extra long day. So we do appreciate your attendance here as well as our community members. So thank you.
All right, thank you. I have a few things I want to mention. Thank you to our Kent Food Bank, who continually comes forward during the holidays when it's a very difficult time for our families. They provide not only food but toys to our students. They're the only ones who are serving 100% of our Kent area school district families. So thank you to all the work that they do. And I had an opportunity to volunteer with them every year during the toy distribution, and it's just very heartwarming what they do. I also had an opportunity to meet with our auditors regarding our risk assessment interview, and shared that all board members have the same opportunity to speak with them about what they'd like to see in the upcoming audit. And then also wanted to thank Communications and Karen Holly for setting up our community conversations, and looking forward to meeting all of you and talking with all of you during that time. We do have a community Dr. Martin Luther King rally happening on Thursday, 17th, at 7 p.m. at Kentridge, that Director Jenny Grojewski from Kentridge is producing with our students from, well, the community rally is community rally, but she's working with all of our students and Fifth Avenue Theater in putting on event in all 4 of our high school as well on the 17th and the 18th. And then finally, I want to just clarify a few things. There have been a number of conversations going on in discussion groups about violation of OPMA by the board, and I do want to state that we had a executive session on the 12th of December. It was a session to discuss the performance of an employee, and as such, there was no violation of OPMA. And we asked the finance department to come in and speak to us to clarify a few things. So it wasn't a meeting to discuss finances that we weren't going to discuss openly at the dais. It was a meeting to discuss the performance of an employee, meaning Dr. Watts, of course. And we had asked the finance department to come in. So I wanted to clarify that because that's going out in the social media, and I want to nip a few of those things in the bud. We also had a work session on the 17th of October. There are claims that Dr. Watts did not attend that meeting. It's a violation of law. And the law states specifically that the superintendent shall attend all meetings of the board. It doesn't say must attend. There are circumstances where superintendents always have a substitute. We've had that under Dr. Vargas as well, where not all superintendents are not able to attend all meetings. So I want to state that because there was a discussion about consulting, the discussion about Dr. Watts attending the Broad conference, and that particular conference didn't come to the dais. I want to be very specific that there was no intention of misleading. There is a distinction to be made between professional development and consulting, and Dr. Watts' contract covers the consulting language, not professional development language. So I want to be really clear on making that distinction because I know Director Daniels brought that up, that wasn't very clear. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, so I was thinking, and it's my understanding, the Broad it's a fellowship program, right? And so it requires a series of 5 meetings, which I think I wasn't aware of. And so I think apparently other folks weren't aware of it either. So I think it just helps to clarify.
Yes.
And it is the separation between what is PD and what is consulting as far as the accusations of. So no, thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, and the Broad, the dates are determined by Broad itself, not by Dr. Watts. So the fact that he's absent on that particular day, that was not determined by him, and he had asked for approval of the 5 sessions way in advance. So I wanted to clarify that because that's come up, and also the question of evaluations, if it should be in public, and no evaluations of an employee does not need to be done at the dais. It can be done in an executive session. What does need to be done is if there are instances where we're extending a contract, some specific changes that need to be made to those contracts, those need to come to the dais, but not his actual performance evaluation. So I wanted to clarify all that because we've been getting inundated with emails and questions, and I want to put it to rest. So, all right, and with that, I think we're going to end this session, and thank you all, and Happy New Year to everybody, and thank you for coming. Have a good night. We're adjourned.